Debaters and judges, this is your 10-minute warning. We've got 10 minutes until start time. Thank you.
I'm gonna send the 1AC, and then I'll start at 2:25 Central.
Can someone confirm for me who's affirmative in this debate? This is the tab room.
Yeah, Kansas MR is affirmative.
Okay, thank you. And 1 minute till start time.
Is everyone good? Can I get like visual confirmation? Thumbs up, thumbs up. Cal, you're good.
I got some lag. Give me 1 second to see if this lag resolves.
No worries.
I'm gonna turn my camera off. You know, I'm still listening, I promise.
Yeah, no worries.
I'm good.
You're good to start. Awesome. Advantage one is Russia. Biden will renew the pressure. Georgia NATO membership. The threat alone focused Russia destabilizes the Caucasus, Montana, and two Republicans. This is supporting Georgia's membership. NATO and Biden continue to push Georgia's potential NATO membership. With the stability of the South Caucasus of Russian influence. When City has supported Biden will provoke a violent Russian response. Moscow police immediately interpreted Bucharest 20 minutes after NATO made a announcement would provide support for Occupation. And the South Ossetia Biden may understand that Georgia's commitment to NATO is impractical, but Russia and Georgia may interpret such ambiguity, disastrous consequences. Georgia means already given. Going to Russia for cover the Biden on accept the application process itself. What a dangerous security of South Caucasus. Georgia's essential without yet another article of commitment to an ally border and increased security of Russia. A consequence to be increased tension between Russia and Georgia, if not outright war. Georgia is indefensible, but promising a security guarantee alone creates a moral hazard for escalation. Men in 20 NATO has repeatedly proclaimed its war remains open, including to Georgia. It suggested the U.S. stand from behind Bucharest, but suggested Georgia's already ally with security guarantees. With security guarantees, Georgia would be difficult to defend given the existence of Russia's doorstep. NATO would need to station troops and a lot more power to even delay Russia. Give Georgia NATO membership would create a moral hazard. Article 5 could encourage reckless driving, mere possibility of membership. Embolden Georgia to drive recklessly, having changed Georgia at NATO, even moving toward admitted, it increases the chance of NATO-Russia competition. That would favor Russia in every aspect. Moving towards NATO integration militarizes the Russia-Georgia border, emboldens Georgia to retake breakaway territories, trending to 18 in the South Caucasus. The landscape is changed by the Nagorno-Karabakh occupied on successes inspired other countries to bring their American territories back to Georgia Occupation, and South Ossetia is occupied by Russia to police and designated for NATO membership with the fact that U.S. ally moves to integrate Georgia. NATO military lead Moscow to build out four positions. The lines of separation may see more tensions. Russian planes flying closer to NATO incidents could happen with great consequences. Applying Article 5 to Georgia instantly starts a war. Davis in 18 policy suggested to include more countries to Russia's border. NATO would turn Russia into an enemy. A decision would be myopic and harmful. One of the biggest concerns to Russia's occupation of Belarusia and Azerbaijan is Georgia joining NATO. Article 5 would immediately require members to go to war against Russia, extending NATO membership to fall down nations of Russia border might suck the United States into a war with a nuclear power. Even if not, security guarantees put Russia and NATO in a half step away from conflict. It opens up multiple escalation pathways for 14. Even if Russia would not attack and launch the alliance, Georgia would dramatically increase the likelihood of a severe crisis. The case is barely from Moscow and police would be only a half step removed from the present circumstances. Russia maintains 7,000 soldiers in Georgia's breakaway territories. Georgia would return Article 5 would be expanded to dispute space in which Russia forces already operating. Moscow's accusation of Georgia's harbors anti-Russia terrorists provides allied pathways or the crisis that escalation. Moscow will prevent NATO's encroachment by force. It draws in the U.S. Felgenhauer and 18. Tbilisi continues to infuriate Moscow for actively seeking membership of NATO. 1,000 U.S. soldiers have been deployed to Georgia for exercises NATO's encroaching and surrounding Russia. And if Georgia becomes a member, that would provoke a terrible conflict. 2008 ended with a ceasefire, which may be broken. Escalation spirals go nuclear entanglement, rulers, red lines, fading, and I see distorted perceptions. New the second spin rules are combined to produce disaster, cyber, air, hypersonics, and ASAP weaponry. Traditional lines entangling nuclear conventional weaponry crisis scenario in which Russian cyber operators gain access to satellite systems that controls both U.S. conventional nuclear systems. We cause a usual lose launch decision when 0 6 believe they are under assault. The charge could be unprotected and larger than NATO. Units of criminal in America poses an existential threat. The U.S. experiences a phenomenon in Georgia, Washington, Washington, into NATO, believe that firm resolve to deter Russian aggression. It had the opposite effect. Russia grew more alarmed which police felt more emboldened, which yielded a massive military response. Critics of entrapment thesis miscount case studies and underestimate the risk. Edelstein in 18 recent efforts to maximize entrapment define the issue differently. Kim, Beckley, and Lanowska, the final way the problems to Beckley traffic only curve states knowingly throw caution to the wind and decision to go to war is rarely dichotomous. Conflict is perceived by extensive deliberation as any voice tend to be minimized, at least driven by psychological domestic or decision-making biases. Even an ally that shares interests only partially end up concluding that their conflict is vital. Entrapment constitutes a process whereby states take on greater risk of being drugged due to a partner's endeavor by virtue of having an alliance. Entrapment can occur in states that states take on significantly greater risk. Independently enlargement to Georgia causes Russia to lower their first use threshold for French 14 expansion, including Georgia would be perceived by Russia as strategic concern. This would be especially acute in Georgia. Georgia, both the source native reciprocated in 2008, where native faced a dramatically more capable Russian precision strike, reverse precision strike regime, and large risk affecting Russian nuclear doctrine in ways that would undermine security. Russia assesses NATO classic conventional forces Moscow responses to nuclear doctrine that call for nukes early doctrine explicitly citing expansion of the alliance, further lowering Russia's doctrinal threat from first use should be discouraged. That leads to preemptive nuclear war of Velez Green 18. The Russian doctrine of preemption would increase the risk of major war, a misfired barrage or collision trigger in a crisis with Syria. Tensions are rising on NATO's east confidence cyber and realms could spill over. Preemption may lead Moscow to use force before it is time to confirm the NATO text. Imminent U.S. policymakers may preempt Russian preemption reciprocal fears of forest attack, which would increase the risk of nuclear preemption due to miscalculated fragility of Russia's nuclear deterrence. The policymakers may face usual losing pressures. Preemption would intensify those increase the risk of nuclear escalation. Extinction outweighs everything else. Barrett 17A. Nuclear war between the U.S. and Russia could send massive smoke into the atmosphere, cause the same global cooling, ozone loss, agricultural disruption, and nuclear runner exchange that scales only possible between the U.S. and Russia. More than 90% of the world's nukes, small regional nuclear one, are unlikely to lead to human extinction. Given the bonus arsenals of risk of extinction is plausibly greater from a conflict between the U.S. and Russia. Russian actions are driven by mistrust, not ambition. Thus, the only path is cooperation via unilateral restraint. Difference in 16. Russian assertions of a broken promise regarding NATO expansion have merit expansion. Validated keep Q at the heart of the German unification. There was no written agreement precluding expansion, but the guarantees were so advanced would be able to return Russian leaders or to prevent further NATO expansion by force. Violated diplomatic arrangements. States compete more intensely, even if Russian resistance was never broken non-expansion arrangement. Makes Russia can be hard to reduce the likelihood that Russia will return special diplomatic conditions. The United States is Soviet weakness despite presenting a cooperative side. Russian actions are driven by mistrust, leaving no door open to Georgia. Deepens Russian insecurity efforts to reassure Russia may produce more stable relationship, reassures full potential to transform perception of the U.S. and power moderates among Russia and justify Russian avoid justifying Russian aggression accused of finding ways for avoiding additional NATO expansion for any circumvention the U.S. opportunity in the 1990 guarantees these policymakers must overcome Russian mistrust. The U.S. will course yet again. They're not revisionist Scots and 18. The revisionist Russian perspective adopts nobly determined disposition by underlying the predetermined courses, denies individual agency. Moscow's approach to the international order significantly fluctuating revisionist behavior should not be exaggerated. Intervention in Ukraine has remained limited to south of the Moscow has a blueprint for an alternative order. The revisionist perspective is unable to have the numerous instances in which Moscow adhered to the norms that supported the Iran deal, WTO, the ECHR liberal rules with these hardly fit a revisionist agenda. Interference in other states is the habit of great powers. The U.S. has a long track record of meddling, discarding new Western sources of NATO and enlargement system where Moscow's fear should not be brushed aside. As paranoia, the plan, the United States federal government should reduce its alliance commitments with the North Atlantic Treaty Organization member states by substantially limiting the conditions under which attacks on Georgia can activate its defense fact. Advantage 2 is Europe, pushing enlargement to Europe derails U.S.-EU relations, jeopardizes 12 on China and climate change. Pontiac Suits and Georgia. Message to NATO will attempt to the United States to strain relations with Europe. Public opinion shows little support for rivalry with Russia, jeopardizing European call on issues ranging from China to commentary. Europe won't support Georgia's membership in NATO. Merkel said that she does not foresee Georgia in a session. Germans not want to ties between Washington and Moscow. Pushing for Georgian membership might risk reestablishing goodwill among NATO allies. A key priority for Biden and Merkel led on the European opposition to warn that Russia would majority expansion as existential. The consequence would be the offering of American ties to Europe, forced the Georgian membership, which stresses relations with allies like Germany. Lobbying for Georgian membership drives a wedge between the U.S. and allies. German 17 lack of consistency by future enlargement was demonstrated most clearly by Georgia, which drove a wedge between European and U.S. pillars. Washington lobbied strongly for Georgia in a session that was asked among some Western European allies. The friction highlighted the question about the fundamental nature of the alliance. France, Germany led the opposition ambiguous assurance about membership at some point in the future exposed its lack of internal unity. European member states are much more likely to be affected by a decision to enlarge. They are far more dependent upon Russia. Energy such would actually undermine security rather than strengthen. The emphasis on expansion clouds alliance focus that diverts pressure from remedy transatlantic disagreements. Ashford and 15 focused on non-member states' attempts to reform within NATO. NATO suffers from a lack of common vision compounded by the expansion. The emphasis on non-member states diverts attention from these problems, making them more difficult to solve. Washington's tendency to equate the member states, which are treaty allies with states which are partners, can send misleading signals. U.S. commitments in place and the focus on Georgia rather than strengthening NATO. The plan is to refocus Europe on China. Independently, it solves arms control with Russia. Mueller, which fell by necessity, refocusing on China would involve pausing NATO expansion. Would be impossible to add towards provoking Russia identity. Georgia, a move for the Europeans have little appetite as to it would do arms control negotiations with Moscow. Europe is divided over China. European allies are aware of picking aside Europe that continues to downplay the danger posed by China would limit the alliance. U.S. Russia armed controls beyond New START solves extinction. Body 20 Russia and the U.S. possess nuclear forces that destroy the world many times over. The treaties limit the nuclear forces to avoid the arms buildup to hide the tensions to avoid a failure or sparking an arms race. A state concerned by the nuclear forces were vulnerable by launch preemptive attack. Arms control can manage its stability. Fears would be dispelled by each being transparent about the number and location of its nukes. That sharp decline U.S. Russia relations has increased the risk of it. And arms race that can make nuclear use imaginable. New START does not constrain exotic strategic weapons, including nuclear cruise missiles and torpedoes. Follow on treaties should address this. Europe is on the fence between the U.S. and China. Alignment with U.S. prevents Chinese tech hegemony. Schumann 216 Europe may not want to choose between the U.S. and China, but it will eventually have to. Europe have good reason to tip their defense security and arrangement with the U.S. provides stability by Chinese economic expansion offers. Europe a treasure trove for opportunities for growth by the balance. The act would likely become untenable positions on both sides of the Pacific. Seem hardening nations. No secret of its goal to foster high-tech industries over to the Western rivalries. Partnerships with the Europeans are part of the success of Chinese agenda. They see joint ventures and corporate co-op as a way to extract the technology know how to China to leapfrog over the Western world. China's relationship with Germany are template for CCP strategy to dominate the economy. Europe could sit back and watch authoritarian China knock away the pillars of the current order that causes a nuclear transition wars chronic 18. The bargaining model identifies rapid shifts in power and causes conflict. The bargaining model breaks down war results. Why I agree to a deal. If your position would be stronger than war, the shifts money, the understanding which states have the advantage. China may take the lead in emerging tech, including 3D printing, hypersonics, quantum 5G, AI. If China were to incorporate the new tech into the military before the U.S. the counter rapid shift that often passes war. Beijing believes emerging tech provides with an advantage. Initiating conflict over Taiwan. Once nuclear armed states are at war, these are the worst. Limiting nuclear war brings friendship and inadvertent escalation. Transatlantic co-op solves warming. Bradberg 1223. Transatlantic co-op on climate essential U.S. engagement on climate issues reduces chances of transatlantic strategy. Use carbon border tax would have a wide-ranging implication. Transatlantic energy can bring others to a carbon-free. Washington and the EU should jointly engage China into part of a trilateral climate dialogue. In the United, if the EU and the US agree on shared standards, this creates the opportunity to become the global standard setter given the size of the transatlantic economy. Key issues where a stronger joint leadership is possible, include methane grid protection and battery tech partnerships with the EU and the United States. If it's a transatlantic Green New Deal, this would increase public awareness of climate change and cooperation. The EU and the US should explore the sustainable finance such as green bonds to assist developing countries. Warming causes extinction, prevent 18 climate change and acidification plus access to earth because of the positive feedback loops. Then food and water shortages create conflict. Climate change is expected to exacerbate water scarcity. Clean water is essential for human survival. Source of addressing accessible rest represent the challenges that are linear and not without feedback loops. Earth's climate positive feedback loops. Warming could cause more CO2 release of fire. Will become more frequent. The catastrophic fire could cause catch humanity off guard and produce an apocalyptic event. Runaway climate change portends existential risks. 25.
I don't have anything.
Okay, we're good for cross X.
Okay. We'll start on the plan text. Does this include the attacks on Georgia as a country or Georgia as a region?
This includes the breakaway territories, so the totality of Georgia. If that makes sense. Is that so? The country? Are you frozen? I'm not sure. The country,
Yeah, Mark just froze. I don't know if you can hear me. He was talking like the entire time. I think.
Should we just restart CX? We got like 15 seconds in, and
Yeah.
let's fix Mark's tech and then just like mulligan the CX.
That's cool.
I'm done with that. Are you dropping out? Okay, he's dropping out and dropping back in.
Do we want to start tech time?
Yeah.
What is it? 20?
I don't know.
Well, either way, we'll figure it out.
I'll start it and figure it out.
Okay, is this working now? You don't hear me?
Yeah, you're good. That was like 15 seconds. So.
Oh, I literally did not hear any of his answers. So if we want to just restart that.
Yeah, that's what we were saying we would do.
Okay, cool. All right, you got Nate?
Yep.
Okay, does it limit Georgia as a country or Georgia as a region?
So it limits Georgia as a country, but our evidence says that includes breakaway territories such as South Ossetia and
Okay, I'm asking more about, does it include Georgian troops and ships, or is it just Georgia as the region of Georgia?
The effect it includes attacks on Georgia region,
but not Georgian troops elsewhere. So not the NATO.
So the process
Article 5 indication, which is under Article 6,
and makes Georgian expansion impossible by limiting the ability for Article 10 to apply or Article 5 to apply post Article 10 application.
No, but Article 5 applies to NATO members and their troops and their ships. If you've said that you don't limit those things, you're only limiting a region within NATO and not the Georgia as a country.
I misunderstood your question. I thought you meant like.
Okay, so you are doing attacks on Georgian forces, troops, region,
yes,
everything.
So, yeah.
So region and their troops elsewhere. So if Georgia had troops in the Middle East, then they would be covered under the plan.
The plan vetoes expansion. So if the normal application of Article 5 would include troops, et cetera, external to Georgia's region, that would not trigger Article 5 post plan because they are not allowed in NATO. Does that make sense?
Okay. And do attacks on Georgia currently activate its defense pact?
If an attack occurred this next second, it would not activate the defense pact. They are not a member state of NATO, but we have a commitment to all member states of NATO to integrate Georgia, both through Article 10 and 2008.
Okay. So the second advantage, the VADI evidence is about arms control beyond New START. What do those arms control agreements look like?
Those, our evidence says they would cover exotic weaponry, such as nuclear cruise missiles and torpedoes, which are not included under New START. The conclusion of that article is that a renewed US-Russia relationship that is not sort of diverged as per the card above would like counter the lack of arms control over those weaponry.
What about Georgia in particular is enough to renew the relationship when there are other factors like Ukraine expansion, Baltics, Montenegro, a bunch of other countries?
We've read evidence that says that, like those other territories in relation to Georgia are sort of irrelevant in Russia's calculation. Ukraine is admired in a civil conflict right now.
The Mueller evidence that you've highlighted says such as Ukraine and Georgia provoking Russia. Ukraine is cited in that evidence. Why is that not enough to?
So historically, the discussion of expansion has extended to both Ukraine and Georgia, which is why some of our evidence that talks about, like in the 90s when we rescinded it, it also includes Ukraine in that. But our uniqueness evidence says that in this context, specifically Biden is pushing for Georgia.
It's not about that. Mueller is actually the most recent card you read in the debate, and it says Ukraine and Georgia provoke Russia.
Yeah,
that's criticizing NATO expansion. Why is Ukraine not a thumper of the F?
So we'll read 2 AC cards that says that Russia is not concerned with the expansion to Ukraine.
So 2 AC cards that counter the 1 AC cards that you've already read.
I'm saying that the uniqueness cards that we've read in this debate say that the largest threat to Russia is through Georgia. The reason why there's diverging interpretations in the EU is because US is pushing Georgia. None of our evidence says that's true of Ukraine.
I'm sending it out.
We keep track of how much tech time we used.
Oh yeah, sure. That was. I mean, I didn't.
It was like 15 seconds. But yeah.
What the tab room doesn't know won't hurt him.
I love that attitude.
I don't know. You want to? No, I'm not going to say the joke. I just realized this is on YouTube. I'm not going to say it.
It'll be 8 off and then advantage 1, advantage 2. I have 9 in there, but we will see because I'm probably not going to get to that. I'm pretty slow, but I always got to have it in case. All right.
Hold on, I'm not ready.
Yeah, I was going to say, is anyone not ready?
8, 8, 1, 2.
All right. Is anyone not ready now? Cool. First off, it's substantial limit must remove all activity without alternative means for activation and affix and restriction. That's FOP 5 that we return to whether the negotiations, regulations, space, and limits, solicitations is not the act public calls the act is not applicable to all means of the terrible solution. The charities main launch campaigns through the mail in person, all the acts and restrictions, solicitation leaves open alternative channels. Accordingly, the act is not space limitation. Then vote for limiting rather allowing insubstantial modifications to defense back the conditions, allow thousands of small apps based on the individual island type of attack and the conditions, many of which don't link the coordinating reference or alter status code enough to trigger links reasonabilities and arbitrary encourages judge intervention and creates a moral hazard for being untopical as possible, as well as being technically unreasonable. The app must specify the agent and plaintext that presents 2 AC pivots that ruin the rejected team is next is the Intel DA. The Biden faces the repair job with American Intel after Trump wrecked relations by installing loyalists and discounting expertise, maintaining alliance governments is key to rebuilding trust and morale. But the app's form and content alienate them. It's land and telling Trump that increased leaders have rejected the findings, appointing loyalists, replacing officials who disagree. Biden must have to fix the damage, rebuilding trust and morale of the Congress relation. And then Congress and the White House, the Biden's user the Biden should tell them that faith wherever he goes, the reformers support for the NATO and other alliances. Biden were issued and tells the maybe use it to replace the key intelligence officials, lawyers, and Biden's destroying trust by corrosion and bad faith on deep hampers crisis response to emerging threats and undermines, signaling that allies and adversaries which terrorist implementations 120 that Jarvis of the AI has battered with follow Biden's morale, but Biden's recognized the international national continue to harness the capacity to ensure the I see that our positive resources to meet the emerging threats of the U.S. and then to meet the challenges and inform policymakers by from allies respect for efficient policies make it difficult to find the stories that parsing effect will be heavy corrosion patch if they run the policymakers probably cryptic anticipate all that respond to all threats allies do not trust American officials and harmonize IC relations off a slew of existential nuclear risks intervening turns off cases for 20 that land until the vital for nuclear non-profit the Iranian nuclear activities and being enabled by the counterterrorism and the streamlined versus the defense and the quality of intelligence financial information cutting off the China the cyber the ideology until conflicts, he has engaged in declining states, healing bolts, returns, useful, de-escalating crises, and offering leaders a chance to do something without resorting to violence or gay friends. Now the covert action they avoided over conflict of control the score next to T alliance governments. There are only defense pacts, the neutrality pacts that are on top of her and explicit typology that the selfish 90 that we view the types of alliance governments in order conflicts allowing three types as we the CDW the historic alliance governments defense pacts non-aggression pacts the obligations that the remain neutral should be involved in war finally entitled to the consultations are when it's attacked. The NATO is more than an alliance commitment to enlargement best extra topical reference and we are often trouble the word the alliance the NATO is more the former alliance than alliance traditionally there's more mutual plus NATO's in the labyrinth institution network involved in the intrusive procedures offer an intermeeting that are made and activated refers to response to the type of attack in cases specified in the defense pact specific every topic area the 19 other US defense pacts are activated only for normal parties attack that's specific for the special treaty for instance the art weapon NATO the Japan US security treaty language of the replicated mutual defense treaties with the other Asian Pacific allies in NATO article 6 occurs only on NATO territory or troop territory there's North Atlantic Treaty and the article 6 for the purpose of article 5 and Arab attacks during shooting attack on territory of the other parties in Europe and North America Algeria the departments of France the Turkey the islands north of the tropic cancer for special aircraft and the other parties will win these territories the other areas in Europe with the occupation forces the other parties who stationed the data when the treaty into the forces and violation the after decreases the promise to enlarge NATO that's not a commitment because the enlargement is not a pact or entente and it allows it's not an alliance because NATO is more than a merely alliance but they add whole members vote limits allowing that alliance commitment to be a promise to anything with an ally explodes limits and avoids core neg arguments like assurance and deterrence which are the basis of existing allied security guarantees neg ground outways because of this reactionary next T and all cause the same problems next the MDT pick the United States federal government should veto Georgia accession into the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and announce this policy and next to Japan Japan views NATO as a mirror of US commitment the African confirms Trump has done an aberration and circles of structural shift in profile that's 1919 the situation Japan faces the strike of the US allies in Europe Japanese force policy and the focal point was what happens Europe about the future NATO the one Japanese commentator put it the European security situation runs the mirror Japanese analysts debating what the terms of the operation of the system, the deeper structure shift in US foreign policy, wondering whether the new plan would be for the possibility that may no longer be able to defend the US insecurity cause proliferating posture changes each in case of Jackson and Tony the favorite men of the Constitution have been advocating nuclear capability, nuclear strength, remerge that the dependencies make a life political pressure on that can no longer the US of Japan and Circuits Korea become a weapon nuclear even if they had stopped short of the insecurity of reliability, increase demand for presence in Asia and increased interest in turns every household center 70 the alliance will change the bringing the energy Germany the nuclear Japan Russia nuclear will not be the India Pakistan and China US relations become the more complex in addition to India Russia, the calculation should be the invention and disposition Japanese Korean weapons that are encouraged to the cascade regional things in the Middle East, Latin America, Africa, the catastrophic environmental and climatic consequences. Next off is conquer the United States federal government using actually we're giving me the text for that. Next off is the advantage kind of from the United States federal government. You should not renew efforts to integrate Georgia and NATO, maintain and expand bilateral channels of communication with the Russian Federation. Clarify that the U.S. Georgia Mutual Defense Treaty that applies to grazing disturbances and develop a suite of proportional response to defend Georgia if they enter NATO and condition the graduated fast-track distribution of COVID-19 vaccines to Georgia on reduced aggression and trapping activities, bilateral channels of communication, solve escalations, bizarre and 20 that mitigate the rest of the escalation, the travel measures the use of the can implement the pursue conflict holding against measures switch the Russian users clearing communications of native escalation use maintain bilateral communication with the rest of the provide the open communication access with the crisis management solves the after limited stuff so more than 90 that rules based order remains highly appealing strategy may clearly cause uncurring both Russian tendency to avoid military crisis the whole point of the crisis to remain level threshold a combination of intensified multilateral pressure and activity of Atlantic equipment to use and expanding the diplomatic efforts can reduce the shifting consequences of years and activities which vary on the percentage geopolitical context against military cooperation with power degrees and adventures to dissuade other actions fearing COVID 20 self entrapment brigado and 20 every country will be seeing climate for vaccines US manufacturers of vaccines to solve the expectations to supply the COVID vaccine because geopolitical power alliance is shifting with leverage going out the countries to create vaccine battery outside of everything on the table generation when the players selected nations and nations to supply commodities difference on when the episode the high demand street value and the next is the conquer count from the United States federal government the United States using a strictly limited constitutional convention should reduce its alliance commitments with North Atlantic Treaty Organization member states by substantially limiting the conditions under which attacks on Georgia can activate its defense pact and next appeasement appeasing Russia short to NPT in cause of Ukraine proliferation that's on deceptive different Russia versus after Moscow would have severe consequences the rest of the world use tolerance of Russian violation in the Ukraine territory would have large implications for future immediate peace possible no the non-proliferation macros Russia further undermine the NPT that be under Russia you can use the infallibility of the Ukraine borders of Moscow that they violated Budapest the agreements import annexation NPT there's a violation of the logic of the mechanism to protect the spread of the atomic weapons invasion versus Russia with the US speaking Russia would combat the early operation the UK the guarantee the left of preventing spread of nuclear weapons the most sensitive securing and travel repercussions to US acquisitions the international order will be great and the revisions because nuclear and regional war is great and stuff as well as the characters the Russian take care of the cunning and trickery the others putting sharp cover power and influence of the challenges when the decided to stop that he will take it able to win again particularly humiliation of the US that there's danger that Putin can miscalculate will understand the strength of the NATO red lines Putin will discover that these NATO leaders are terrible Putin's military efforts to find the nuclear weapons single stage carrier place in the world horrific all advance one Ukraine is all cause Miller says that evidence stacking all other Eastern European countries all causes can't see nothing they extend native to the Baltic countries here. The Charles expansion continues to expansion Asia, the rest of the periphery Macedonia, the newly added countries, Croatia, the Montenegro, the Albania, the Latin Europe, West Central, the British Cross, the German, Tribune, the Acton, murders behind the Macedonia, 20 to the Foreign Security Committee, and 10 Russia, no members up to Meta and 20 the Recoup acknowledge the problem that until Russia changed, we cannot do the formula directive of NATO is skeptical with NATO this season model without formula the opposite says no Russia world turning 18 that Christian world to brother NATO team for Moscow very much left haven't changed that there's haven't voiced a higher degree of mobility they all agree that deterrence go up that there's interest in attacking the Baltic states of Poland they've seen more the Putin to make sure the rest of the move as well as looking to east central and start Moscow will not convention that but it's likely nothing for military activity war for American the impact starts at 0.38% that's Rodriguez 19 I get a sense of how probable nuclear war might be looking historical weapons and visa actions then predictions made before because of reactive those predictions chance of nuclear war with the rest of US Russia that are around 0.38% and Article 5 is in ship by the whole the Article 5 is not ship by the attacking limited NATO is not for all this not apply to the NATO such conflict Article 5 not enforce the forces option it does not specify the existence standards going to use force and that's why Article 5 was written in our advantage too. Arms control fails has no impact as Thomas in 19 that the relationship between emerging tech and escalation is straightforward. The portrait of them is judging factors necessary and insufficient to cause conflict. They are argues that emerging tech is the intervening variables and insufficient and sometimes be necessary to target average escalation in the layers with persistent dangers. The strategic controls that they lead misplaced between the arms control rush cheats. That's Schneider and the 70s versus cheat on arms control beginning franchise the university not the model for foreign strategies dealing with the rest of those and to get this up things that didn't improve the Soviet Union job in today's ways that the Russia was not complying with the numerous agreements that when skies that by BWS, the CBWD, Vienna, the Budapest, the Istanbul, the MTRCR, and CFP, the violation of our actions, one-time instance, misunderstanding, legitimate military significant, market credit, significant, and no China impact. That's read in 20 them. The system is controlled by the US and the EU, who maintain the advantage over China, economic, political, and military. The series of alliances mean that systems are alone following overall. The has little limited impact on the evidence will be severe. That has an interest in maintaining the status quo. Not have the power to alter transfers. Have limited negative impact. These include the trade practices and SCS that the US and China's neighbors have a committee that rule back and negative effects and warmer days because it's the IBD in 18 new study in the privilege all finds the climate of warming from climate change to 45% actual 10% model economic the planet has shown for us to increase CO2 the less model for future warming spatial over the IPCC's planet warm not learn after the end world climate is below the compares coming into the appears in the AWC model journal climate change journal published studies in climate change shifted because of warming another degree in the journal Nature doubling CO2 would boost 4.5 degrees is wrong. Earth credit wrong.
Was the text for that one counterpoint sent?
Yeah, it was sent in email.
Let me grab. Okay. Otherwise, are you ready?
Hold on.
Yep.
I'm gonna wait.
Got it.
Okay. T enlargement alliance commitments are defense pacts. Thus, the resolution reads: the United States federal government should reduce its defense pacts by at least limiting the conditions under which its defense pacts can be activated. How is it not just reductive or redundant? I suppose.
Yeah, so it's about the resolution is limited to the defense pact. Yeah, the resolution is limited to the defense pact. So that could be the activating conditions. That could exist beyond whatever defense pact, like there are other definitions of defense pact. However, our controversy is that your basis of topicality is on the subject that that NATO is more than an alliance, which you're basing topicality based on the 2008 promise that we would not enlarge NATO. That promise exists. NATO cooperation exists outside of alliance commitments because it's things like economic relationships.
I guess the Weaver evidence just defines alliance, which is like whatever, we'll define alliance commitment. But like, what should we read a resolution that the floor and the ceiling are the same thing? Like, why the fuck include both of them?
Yeah, it's not.
How is that a reasonable interpretation of the topic?
Yeah, so it's not. So first of all, it's not. The resolution is saying that alliance commitments includes the based on the CWP. Is the strongest alliance commitment is a defense pact. Then the second part of the argument is that we don't think that alliance commitments can be things like promises to NATO. The Weaver evidence is really good. It says that NATO is far more than an alliance and that commitment would be extra topical to that definition of what alliance would be or alliance commitment would be.
The status of all the counterplans.
Kondo.
What is the net benefit to the MDT pick?
Yeah, the net benefit to the MDT pick is the Japan DA as well as the
this card does not say Article 5. It just says it mirrors U.S. commitments. What is the distinction in terms of the signal between the plan and the counterplan?
Yeah,
we functionally describe the plan as the counterplan. We see the process.
The distinction is large because the plan changes how the treaty is applied to NATO member states, which means that they're calling into question broader Article 5 commitments to NATO and other things like that, which causes Japan to be concerned about the broader Article 5 commitments that they get in their own alliance. Okay, so that's distinct from that's and the Kanani evidence says that they only care about what the commitments to allies are. The reduction of pushing Georgia, etc.
So then, as per your own words
time
right
that mark.
there, if we win, our interpretation of the plan does not change the text of Article 5, these disades go away?
No, not necessarily. The
then
Kunani
what
evidence
is
just
the
says that they follow closely what happens in Europe and debate about the future of NATO. It's more about broader alliance commitments to those members. The thing that solves your AF is completely just the NDT pick, where we just say we will veto Georgia from entering, as well as the other counterpoint plank on the advantage counterpoint that says that we won't push Georgia
Okay.
in entering, which is what your internally says is critical for Georgia to accede to NATO.
Okay.
Yeah.
The article, I guess, I don't have much time. We'll start prep with 10. Just to cover my bases, no turkey, right? Yeah, okay, cool.
No, other off case skipped. Just double check.
No, just turkey was skipped in the doc, right?
Yeah, just Turkey.
I have is at 7:32.
Octas. Sent.
Order. We're missing Michaela.
I'm gonna run to the restroom real quick if that's not back.
I guess I'll go 2.
Well, I guess Fairground's going.
Well, I guess I'll sit here and peruse debate decks.
Say, now I feel like I'm supposed to go somewhere, but I don't have anywhere.
Read a little bit about preemptive self-defense.
Oh, Michigan broke that, didn't they?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, there's a wrong Tom Bay card or 2 in there, I hear. It's been alleged.
Couldn't be me.
Self-defense. Here, it's a good F.
It's good enough that we immediately abandoned it.
Not yet confirmed, to be clear.
I just mean yeah.
I'm just proud of Rob for reading something new ever.
Let's spill all of Dartmouth's secrets right now.
Yeah, what do you want to know? We'll do a Q&A. Ask me anything. No questions?
And just my main question is why you hate our oldest treaty ally in Southeast Asia.
I have the same question as well. Me too.
You're going to have to straight that one up with Mr. Tom Bay. I think it's a personal thing. It does not represent the institution of Dartmouth. Disclaimed. All opinions are his own.
Next
Also, what's
question.
happening right now?
Graham's in the restroom.
A mass bathroom break because you were gone.
You caused
Oh shit! I was like 2 feet away.
Oh no.
Well, we're good.
Next question for the Dartmouth AMA.
I love a good AMA.
How soon until we get another card that is a YouTube transcript of a lecture by Rom's dad?
It entirely depends what you say in your future debates.
Okay, good to know.
Contingent answer.
About as long as it'll take for him to read again the like radiation satellites fall to Earth impact.
Unbeatable.
Thank you for pantomiming that, Michaela.
All right, now that Judge Troll time is done.
Yeah, you can do it.
Yeah, can we get an order maybe?
I have a really small bladder. Advantage 1. Advantage 2. Topicality. Limit plus reduce. Alliance commitment. T substantial. Article 5 pick. Advantage counter plan. Con counter plan. Japan. Appeasement. And then the ICDA. Just a heads up, that is a little bit different from the doc. IC's on top, order it's on bottom. Cool with everybody?
T like reduce and then T substantial limit.
Yes.
Okay,
yeah, so
cool.
sorry if that was confusing. Yeah. T substantial's after. Okay. Is everybody good? All right. U.S. Russia war outweighs arsenal size means it's the only exchange large enough to cause extinction. That's fair. Ukraine is not an all-cause. Our evidence all says Georgia is sufficient, and regardless, it is a different theater of conflict, so it cannot possibly some conflict over the South Caucasus. So Ukraine is not an all-cause. 18 Ukraine lobbied for amount the differences. Military thin Ukraine military and because he has with Ukraine red line to accommodate Russia, and then extending Russia's fleet. The plan also spills over because it empowers moderates within the Russian state. Yes, membership. Biden's talking shown Russian interests to lobby NATO and real use influence to marginalize dissent and grant to BC through the application process. That's Spontaneous actual accession is irrelevant when you see Spontaneous amended and say Russia and Georgia will misinterpret ambiguity proven by future arrest and the process of lobbying alienates allies and sows resentment to links to advantage to. That's Spontaneous in German. Yes, Russia War 1 is enlargement. It's provocative and threatening with frames defense. NATO's promise to integrate Georgia triggered Russian arrest 20 minutes after it was announced to risk tolerant traditional checks failed because Russia is insecure and willingness to start a war to prevent a circumvent. Third, moral hazard. Article 5 means Georgia will drive recklessly and start a war that's meant. And they've also dropped that it instantly starts war. If they add Georgia, yes goes nuclear. One is entanglement. Russia's nuclear forces are fragile and conventionally intermingled, which means limited strikes or cyber attacks trigger use and lose and pressures. That's maybe two is preemption. A low nuclear threshold. Two is mutual fuel cyber suppressed attack, which causes disco. That's well screen. The right is a meaningless quantification. Yes, entrapment. Article I is a tripwire. May not be in strict legalese requiring drawing, but that is the basic expectation, and we'll read cards that substantiates that. And future is proven by all of this. Plus, we have 1,000 troops in Ukraine, Europe. New U.S.-Russia arms control does work and solve nuke war. Unrestrained weapon ability creates paranoia, arms races, and first strike sentence. That's body fails now with AF unique. This the plan causes a follow-on agreement, which solves this. Also link turns cheating. Yes, China impact. China's tech leadership is nuclear, gives them regional escalation dominance, which causes invasion through bigger ship accidents, limited use. That's Kronig. The Rev does not assume China's tech dominance. It says the US and EU maintain advantage over China. Yes, impact to warming. Sea level rise, extreme weather resources, biodiversity shocks make the planet unhabitable. Feedback loops are not assumed by any negative. It makes it quick and uncontrollable. That's could be our topicality. We need one limit. The plans preclude existing new members from acting Article 5. In Georgia, if they make cross-ex a violation, we did not concede anything beyond Article 6 to reduce the plan rolls back. The US has written pre-existing lies compared to support Georgia's action from NATO 18. We with the 20 member nation view for repeated the opposite of policy article sharing fully committed integration countries to start to join the alliance. NATO is more than alliance, but that's definitely not a definition of alliance commitment. Third, plain text of the vacuum counter the Afghan limited defense pack additions are not pre-existent or certain one limits confined include threatening and legitimacy in one legislative definitions here terms real surviving from the boundary of the large two can express this possibility can is no definitive be able to use for saying this simply possibility for sure can use setting over the future. Third, defense pack additions or certain breaks in one list user efficiency in the future that for deepers. I promise us anything else we're doing occasional occurrence make us only possibility which does not have to occur. Fourth, reduce modifies alliance commitments or written agreements to be a certain way with allies. Would you get me the topic committee of evidence 10 and 7 commitment is defined for unit of allies and it's supposed to act a certain way from the conditional counter agreement between allies. Their alliance commitment F does not have intent to exclude defense acts or a type of alliance. Preferred one, predictability. Third, lacks a basis and makes the res redundant. Means third is counterintuitive and violates plans limiting terms limits. Two, every app violates an interrupt that requires limiting pre-existing conflicts because those don't exist in all conditions currently dangerous. And a certain third app ground flex beyond the defense pack 4 is good because apps have to withdraw troop commitments, solve anything, force new limits offense or to exclude counters without pre-existing commitments. They also cause neutrality packs to be topical, which turns at no ground fifth, no ground lost defense pack 4 assurance to politics in case check reasonability avoids substance crowd out. Extra T is good because it maximizes ground they can pick out of it. Also, not all commitments need to be confined to the defense pack 4. Consider that a counter trip thing. Inserting this chart top committee 20. Key substantial. We need the plan limitation encompasses every type of attack against Georgia and includes future activation. Counter trips essentially means consider what Christian towards the terms should be from a considerable limit means prevent from increasing. As for the other page, preferred first arbitrariness term is read from out of context work. This is an overrides communities electoral selection link turns so often so that doesn't matter. Counter only our F is topical. Second, if we're limiting the topic is untenable, it's just withdrawal which confines afflex and stagnates the topic. Third, picks irritatingly inverts limits and excuse neg. Fourth, near limits or grounds offense assurance only 5 pay qualities. And as for the other page, reasonability also applies here. A spec counter trip the off only has the spec as far as the res 1 arbitrariness non-resolutional procedures uncomfortable and cause goalpost shifting. They also crowd out topic education by shifting from substance to actor cross X check ground is inevitable lit bias in the block check. Reasonability Article 5 pick perm to the counterplan does not compete. The pick's implementation is indistinguishable from the case since allowing non-members to vote Article 5 is impossible, including members who do so in the aft counterplan must compete by text and function. Textual alone is bad. Gus clash by making reword counterplans competitive and turns ground. They also said Japan was a net benefit, so if we win competition, it goes away. No net benefits. The only way is for it to compete is to allow non-members to vote the NDT. Any competitive version of this pick would not solve because it would allow Georgia to invoke Article 5, precluding the security guarantee. It's key to check every 1AC impact that's Pontius amended in French, all of which is specific to Article 5. The plan also has to be codified and irreversible to solve Russian trust. The advantage counterplane perms 1 to 2 to the F and never cover the counterplane flanks 3 to the counterplane links in that benefit. It does not integrate Georgia as per the first plank deficits. Is when is advantage 1 mistrust abrogation will promise not to expand makes Russia distrusting of all other U.S. initiatives and sinks other priorities. Such difference in 2 is arms racing and circumvented Georgia mandates it causes lowering nuclear thresholds. That's French. It also doesn't solve advantage 2 because it does not revitalize relationships with Germany or cause cooperation. Otherwise, they would say no to any outreach efforts. Hot links fail. Bank and chambers been cooperative relations for the states are simply really got something because of hot links and one, but trust is going to result in failure. There's no bilateral treaty. Country in 20 bilateral treaty with the U.S. and realistic Georgia U.S. interests and what to be ready for election. The church is also strategy for consequences of bilateral systems. In fact, Georgia team a bilateral treaty include the use of pivot Asia, the military system, both the policy manipulator and escalation to Iran. The COVID conditions plank does not solve. Georgia does not think what they're doing is aggressive, so they don't think that they'll be forfeiting aid, and the costs of backing down are existential. In that way, the COVID stuff, and they'll get it eventually anyway. Counterplan, it's illegitimate, opens the floodgates to thousands of individual actors and prevents us from weighing our cases off. Permutations 1 to 2 to the counterplan must compete by text and function. Was predictable. 2 3 to the F is the conclusion of a con. 4 to the F is the process of the counterplan links to everything because it's unprecedented. Deficits 1 delay Hugman and December the Constitution never reviewed once in a year 8 months. 2 far right co-ops the counterplan. Just read that as an analytic. 3rd irregular processing rec foreign policy. Coherence. Our evidence says that Biden is key because they have Biden is key because he has sole authority over executive foreign policy and irregular processes would undermine Russia's perception of that durability. 4th Biden's events he loves and large triggers both advantages. That's Pontius. You need a solvency advocate. Otherwise, anything else explodes the literature base that is unpredictable. Con is bad use of UC stat and advocacy skills because it encourages argument and responsibility. Japan non-unique. The commitment is not credible. That's meant in 1 is logistics. Georgia's an eventual A218 geography amended to 20. Georgia will be impossible to defend that's unbelievable. Since to credit with shares for Russian ADBT for Russian states and Russian army says the Russia clear advantage 2 is interest asymmetry, bending of 20, differences in what comes to say short term Russian security issue, the effects of the exchange, asymmetry, Russia defend. At Georgia, third stalled the session talks, confirmed maybe commitments whenever I call it German asymmetry from Sweden membership of Georgia, comfortable position, partnership, including visibility differences in the security, company pressure from pressure from Russia, nation, Western analysis, Russia's coercive actions, military aid solves the link to in the 20th November, promoting the initial legal alternative to with me to help the same benefits of membership against cooperation, really, and social will be compatible with Russian awareness, and the presence, incredibly wrong, fission, seem credible, it is not a real sentences, repeatedly just states from the people's terrorism, America's allies, and we change the period of this is not associated with the firmness in previous crises, the Corpus Marx, in the previous crises, no spillover, plant signals resolved to defend existing member states, being 19, renewed focus the collective efforts, reassure the Baltics, and members of the Russian against the community, reduce interrelations, and bouncers, Russian nations, are result to defend existing member states, and federal stronger from the dates Russian, and what would signal the reluctance to add members, advantage to is a straight turn, appeasement, non-unique, their evidence is about the Budapest memorandum, that's at Grenchen 14, Budapest is not with the paper in which it was written, requesting issues with us to research the Budapest, the Russians or the Western Crimea, because this is the new agreement, inside Russia's defensive support for the Iran deal, WTO and ECH, or evince self-restraint and give it a stake in the LAO, that's cost, no means and motive for broader extension competition in Russia to how the accession of Russian economic military to historical economic population limited after regional interest, Russian military spending is economic excessive for products policies such as extending NATO to real future when American Russian interest collective official realistic by the country's limitations. Independently, Russian aggression is different by mistrust and fearsome encirclement that Chipinson. Their card is about Ukraine. That's awkward. Military aid solves the link as per the other page. And then the plan also signals resolve to defend existing member states. So it is not appeasement. Georgian accession, Automatic Article 5 French Constitution, automatic credibility. And need for any things ensuring the vote of the third is credible, credibility, aggressive war, nuclear power, arbitrary situation, news, proved risk tolerant, as water is progressing, that's a proposition, defend churches, is more established. Members, there's no proliferation impact. Every existing state disproves cascades. I see disadvantage. Congress ignores the plan initial of 20 public discussions surrounding this on this issue for Rebellion North Macedonia, as much as 20 words as much as the stages of all the centers accusing of religious working for proving the lack of hyperlease. And then a remarkable Congress likes the plan. They distrust Georgian leadership. Small like December 20. The Russian factor represents of Georgian American religious anti-Russian Senate Congress with churches religious politicians on a quick with the halls differ. Georgia Fetching is view with and distrust of Congress and business dealings with Russia. A hard line on Russia drains PC and sparks backlash from Ministry 9 for Vladimir and tends to further the trouble to focus on COVID, economic healing, artificial and climate change. The end of the series we see the stand up with Russia would be short-sighted. Advantage 2 is a link turn. Fishman 3-4 an agenda to revolution of the religion title challenges are achievable from this to for the use of covenants and PC to take on further challenges. It is empirically denied by 4 years of IC bashing under Trump. This is that is absurd. It says he needs to give its allies that our intel is good and we won't misuse theirs. No F the plan changes that. It mentions alliances on a long list of other things behind the switching, so there are tons of numbers. And the impact also assumes no intel, so no if the internal link gets there, no terrorist resurgence because of COVID data and 20 COVID creates mitigations for sure strength of the system and remove significant targeted crowds. I'm sure it doesn't make tactics for illicit conspiracy. I can say academic devastation of terrorism without need for the being started. This is devoting time of money. I plan to be taking back seat. The card is marked back seat. No Iran war horrors in 20 in the wake of sell the money fears of world really tries to people between the US and Iran and likely to be a remaining change the sound because rare particles released. Facts and rights it's like to be highly considered.
Yeah. Tell me where those two cards are.
Yeah, I can check. Yeah, do you all mind sending a marked copy?
Yeah.
With
We're
those
going to
extra.
combine these two documents. So
Back seat right there.
actually,
And then
you say considered right here. I'll save this in the round folder if you want to add that to the document path. We'll send out the marker. To see extra. It includes
We're gonna take a second to prep while you all are doing that.
we're gonna take this.
We stop time at 9:35.
Is it cool if I just send out the marks, or would you want me to delete cards that I did not read?
Just the marks is fine. Also, it looks like Michael froze on
My
there.
computer is just
Here, just Zoom's not working. This is still technically not tech time because they're still sitting at the dock. So Michael just yeet out of there and jump back in, and then we'll start tech time once our Wi-Fi is just terrible right now. So. Oh, you're back. You're back on here.
Yeah. Does this work? Can you hear me? Cool. Thank God. When we get the doc, I can start.
Sure. I'm always super paranoid in this one. I actually think I only marked one card.
Outside of the ones in
Outside of the ones in his thing. And that was...
I have all the marks, so I can tell you. You marked at least 2.
Okay.
Oh, no, sorry. I was looking at the one in C. I apologize. Different speech.
I've got it too. Huh.
Fisher is marked at...
Yes.
Yeah, Fisher is marked at previous crises.
Yep. David was finished. Okay. Was Carpenter finished? Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so we're in agreement that it's Nate Stuff and Fisher at previous crises. Do you also want a mark copy?
The Fisher, well, sorry, if it's only Fisher that's in there and then Nate stuff has already been sent, I can just get the Fisher card. Where is it?
It is under, yeah, cred theory wrong under Japan DA. Mark it in previous crises. And I'll send that on in the body of the email too.
I got it. No worries. Ready for cross legs? Ready?
Yes.
Okay. Let's start on T. What definition do you think says defines alliance commitments?
The Denny evidence.
Yeah, and where does it say alliance commitments?
It says alliance commitment is defined as.
What line is that?
It's so the first sentence, and then it says.
Oh yes, alliance period commitment. What makes you think that that's so alliance commitment?
Yes, so commitment in the obvious context of alliances, because he's defining certain subtexts.
Oh, okay, so it's in the context of alliances.
Dependence.
That makes sense.
I'm serious.
All right.
Like there is a distinction.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, the top piece of evidence you read, the 2018 evidence, says that we have a commitment to anyone that shows any interest in the potential of joining NATO.
That is irrelevant.
No.
What's up? So terms that have aspired to join the North Atlantic Treaty Organization is a term of art. It includes 3 countries.
Yeah, but the bottom piece just says that they show that they're interested. If any other country did that in the future, would it not be included in your topic?
It says countries that aspire to join the alliance. There's a
I don't think you have evidence on that. I haven't seen it. Article or Advantage 1. What? Oh yeah, they say yes, accession, and it's like U.S. pressures and stuff. Do you have any evidence that says that accession will happen to NATO without U.S. pressure?
Will accession happen?
Will Georgia be added to NATO without U.S. pressure?
Probably not.
Okay, and do you have any evidence that would say the opposite of that?
That would say like Georgia would still join even if the U.S. vetoed enlargement? Yeah. If the U.S. vetoed enlargement, Georgia would not join NATO.
No, not vetoed. That would say that Georgia could join without U.S. pressure. Do you have any evidence in the treaty that says that?
What do you mean U.S. pressure?
Okay, I'm going to move on because I'll just go with your first answer. If Georgia starts a war, why would NATO be forced in?
Because a few reasons. So first, the U.S. has about 1,000 troops in Ukraine that we rotate in yearly as part of military exercises. So a conflict in Georgia would kill those trip.
Does Article 5 require that U.S. forces go to conflicts that NATO countries started?
So again, it's a question of those tripwire forces. So that's a factor, right? So for example, if Russia kills 1,000 US soldiers, the domestic response will be very hawkish.
Okay, and do those forces not exist post-plan?
I would say the plan reduces alliance commitments to Georgia, so...
If a war breaks out with, so you're going to say a new definition of the plan. Why is Biden key to the Russian perception, and what evidence delineates that on CONCON?
I did not hear your question.
Why is Biden key to the Russia perception, and what evidence delineates it?
Because the Pontius evidence says that the ability to push NATO enlargement is vested in the executive, and that the administration statements are how Russia determines whether to aggress against the South Caucasus.
We're at 9:30. All right, we're just.
Yeah, we're starting at, was it 9:35? Starting now. We stop at 350.
Actually, I'm gonna start just because my doc isn't fully saved. 1 second. I'm gonna. Okay, I'm starting again.
We stopped it. Mark, would you stop that?
I have 315.
Okay, 315.
Michael's fixing the stand. Okay. The order is going to be T alliance commitments, T substantial, then the MDT pick. Wait, where was condo flow? Oh, condo's on ConCon. So I'll do ConCon. Then advantage 1, advantage 2.
T alliance commitments, T substantial limit, ConCon 1, 2.
Yep. Is anyone not ready? Let me see if everyone's here. Cool. Is anyone not ready? Perfect. Our interpretation is alliance commitments only defense pact, neutrality pact, or entente. That's explicit intent defined and typifies the topic based in literature. That's Silverson. That's best for the topic, and they haven't counter-defined alliance commitments anywhere. So it's game, set, match. 1 is limits only, allowing non-pact commitments to be alliance commitments, explicit topic, and non-military activities, military training, special force operations, cybersecurity hardening, improved command and control, and thousands of other cooperative activities that have great solvency advocates that we don't know about. 2 is ground assurance and endurance are key functional limits, but allowing the app to go outside security guarantees allows new unpredictable mechanisms that can evade those generics. Every other aspect of political cooperation becomes an area of another potential app advantage with unique and unpredictable tricks to meet our defense-based arguments, which is why the floor of the resolution doesn't solve or prefer any risk of our offense. Net ground is reaction to the single-player top proves the app can win with literally only one app, but the NDT executive power NDT proves the neg is screwed against a barrage of unpredictable foreign policy as with the TS recourse. They say counter-interpretation, they meet limits there. Frame for the global counter-interpretation arguments, they define a fuck ton of words that are not alliance commands. You should check any team if they win what their counter-interpretation is, provide some limits because it doesn't exclude apps that go beyond alliance commitments, which is what all of our offense is based on, and this is based on the second half of the resolution, which doesn't matter. It's also defined in the noun limit and enlarged in the context of physical space. Limit is a verb in the resolution. We'll insert a blue rehighlighting. We're also not going for this part of the resolution, which means they don't solve the first half of the resolution. The alliance commitments, the enlargement pledge argument is super wrong. It's evidence just says commitments. It doesn't say alliance commitments, and it also identifies it could be a million different things. If anyone has any interest in joining the alliance, pledging to seek to expand NATO isn't an alliance commitment. It's not as a commitment, but the topic says alliance commitment, which is a self-constrained term of art that only refers to military attacks military pacts that are defensive, non-aggressive, or entente. That's still evidence preferred and explicit intended to define because it's likelier that the author isn't using the term incidentally, and it defines more of the topic phrase, which is more predictable for a basis of preparing arguments. They the global frame for second half resolution. It doesn't mean that you meet the first of it. The grammar argument to vote for this argument means you would have to abandon the rule of grammar and err towards nonsense. Same reason why I'm saying win the debate by reading cards isn't equivocal to by reading cards you win the debate. And the reading of by at least is backwards. If they do in the 1A, by at least implies a plan. It must mean a limitation that reduces, not that a limitation a priori qualifies as a reduction. The sentence "bring me a dog," by at least bring me a black animal demonstrates the reduction is not a necessary condition for all limitation. A black bear or black cat qualifies as a black animal, but not a dog. Hands on two, there are arguments that can be noticed. The a priori argument involving at least one of the arguments on the dog is black. The black. We know the argument is invalid. You know these a priori the operate expressed by at least one adds both. They consider the class of any k sentence as a sentence of x follows the same sentences can never happen in both class and k have a true sense of the sentence x follows prefer interpretation because it would make sense in a normative context of resolution, but only their evidence makes only our evidence makes sense. Only their evidence makes sense in a declarative sense, which would make sense because it would already been declared in the first part of the resolution, but it's not topically makes sense in terms of the resolution. The we me argument about commitment, I'll do the violation debate here. The ass is breaking any promise we made with NATO to expand counts as reducing alliance commitment. That's wrong. One is alliance. NATO is far more than alliance. It encourages all political, operational, and technical cooperation that falls outside the term alliance, which is falsely defined in the context of NATO. That's a waiver evidence preferred because it makes an intentional distinction between NATO and an alliance. That means pledging an increase in NATO as a whole is more than alliance commitment is extratropical. NATO as a whole is more than alliance. So Robertson too, NATO is much more than alliance. Sits on the center of partnerships that engage in the wide curriculum throughout the European Atlantic and beyond. Our most comprehensive tools of knowledge assets and capabilities 27 Euro Atlantic partners, and NATO is more than like the reason that matters is that every stage that we meet there's a violation. When we promise to include Georgia and Ukraine into NATO, we promise to include them in something broader than alliance. We are thus making a promise to add breaking a promise to add Georgia and Ukraine to an organization that adds more than the alliance. That's like saying that we limit a promise to keep people out of the WTO, even if they're making a promise to allies. It would not be topical simply because the end result is not the alliance structure. They also people we promised to made alliance commitments with us. We promised to expand NATO. Expanding NATO is larger than alliance commitment. The promise to expand NATO is extra topical. Two is it's not alliance commitment. Which are only defense pacts, non-aggression pacts, or entente agreements. They agree that the commitment to increase the size of NATO prefer that because our evidence because only our evidence defines the entirety of the phrase alliance commitment, which is what there's at best is just the phrase commitment in passing, which is used as any other synonym because it doesn't have intent to define it. Also explodes the topic because they getting to reduce any NATO members have ever decided what they want to do makes it thousands of new apps topical by like any of those plans operationalized against NATO missions in Africa and Afghanistan, which means they know link DAs. The plan in the vacuum argument doesn't make sense. They concede the Article 6 counterinterpretation that they aren't topical even if it's a vacuum. They concede a limit to the region voter because it justifies infinite new territories, explodes limits, and undermines net ground, which is an existing commitment. Two is that even if you win, they vote negative on presumption that proves the plan is nonsense. Three is it's a moral hazard for resolutional words in the plan. Default to how the app is explained as a metric for T. Two, one is CCX that they ban enlargement as the only topical way to solve the app. Four is that they haven't used words in the resolution context. Copying and phrasing words doesn't mean it has a meaning. Only way to understand the plan is by looking at all the pieces. Ukraine and Georgia add context, which make it untopical. The floor ceiling argument doesn't make our topic coherent. That's zero warrant for it. Our interpretation is not based on any words following it. Our argument is literally that you can go beyond the ceiling of alliance commitments. That is not true with your precision impact applies. Also, our definition of alliance commitment is specifically precise to how we spell out alpha net ground. I don't need a counter interpretation to counter it because they have not been proven as relevant to the alliance commitment. And alliance commitments can include offensive actions. R1 and C aggression is defining it in context of defense pact, which is the second part of the resolution. People can still do actions beyond defense pact like non-aggression or OCO if they meet the floor, which means that the mootness argument doesn't make sense. Yarlow Milo 16 alliance commitments were in pledges to defend the formal security cooperation entity. Alliances and aggression pacts in the context of defense pacts. If we have members that all endure each other from aggressions, alliance commitments that they have to go to live as states through behalf of the allied. The can limit defense pact conditions don't matter because they're on the first phrase of the resolution that was done above. Reduce modifies not about alliance commitments. The Denny card doesn't say it, and it doesn't alliance commitments as any promise between allies and concludes that they're arbitrary and impossible to evaluate. Into the highlighting reduce only makes smaller courts appeals to sex. The board has argued that district action is not a reduction. We affirm the statute addresses reduction of the change and regulations that have set forth the coordination is not the statute directed to reduction is smaller amount petition or cannot receive reduction. Reduce and limit or distinct sphere 7. The reduce means bring down or reduce means substitute with word limit intent to exclude. Yes, it does. The difference is defense back everywhere way around the 1 2 AC card has the intent to exclude and debatability from the argument even if the tech doesn't go negative. The R impacts that way. Predictability. Our definition is predictable and redundancy doesn't matter. That was done above. The overlimiting argument doesn't overlimit. There's 30 NATO countries and 3 other areas to choose from. Each defense pack has a modified in specific ways like accepting certain countries like Caucasus, Arctic, and Baltics. There's no reason adding new countries as a reason to heat Afghan or having to react offense always anyways. The future alliance commitments argument doesn't make sense because it's about the second half of the resolution. We can still limit future conditions for activation, but not the alliance commitment part. The functional limit doesn't check because And the advocates add unpredictable mechanisms to be core arguments. That's concessionary ground, which is not worse than it gets a monopoly and preference specificity to only beat the two DAs that have reasonability prefer competing interpretations. When it's arbitrary and encourages judge intervention, it's way more likely to shift goalposts, especially when they have predictable evidence to tend to find. 2 is it creates a moral hazard to be as untopical as possible. It's still can be reasonable, which makes it impossible to magnifies our offense. 3 is they aren't reasonable. Any NATO agreement to do anything is to be topical off ground, which makes the topic wholly unmanageable. The full floor of the resolution doesn't solve it. Causes extra topicality. 1 is that they always make an unpredictable solvency advocates. 2 is that you should hold the line with the NDT. The late elims will decide what after read. The framers' intent is wrong. The topic committee said dumpster fire people, horse trade, and word add and subtract words, which means it's not assumption to assume what the framers' intent actually is. The resolutions that are being compared are categorically different. Res 4 has including instead of which is being met as a higher floor outside of the word terminate, which means it's likely rejected for other reasons. It also means you shouldn't evaluate it, only evaluate the text of the resolution. Condition counterplan conditionality is good. It discourages asking when it sees, but encourages the best portable maximum education and by testing opportunity costs and making advantages intrinsic there. Model pronoun to shift online class and turn skew, which is arbitrary and encourages unpredictable rules that cut out negative arguments. Purpose and absolute check counterplans without ideas and procedures. In particular, they're actually 2AR and it's strategic time trade conditionality. Even if we lose 100% of conduct, holds every kind of red that solves our often projecting teams arbitrary and crowds out substance and counter-interpretation. We did T substantial. They can't do they can't classify the only RF argument. That's infinitely regressive and makes it a moral hazard. That was done on the other page. Advantage 1, excluding Georgia isn't enough. Encirclement and overstretch are inevitable. The Ukraine is at all costs. The Russians' perception of molar evidence is we'll insert molar evidence and past moves Macedonia, Croatia, Montenegro, and Albania, and future moves to other 20 countries, including Ukraine, all disprove that. That's the Kankian evidence. All it means that they will perceive and enable Euro's presence in Poland cuts off Russian reach there. 20 American presence in Poland shows safeguarding criminal hostilities, binding the capabilities of defense, military potential. There's shifting in strategic area and defense has multiple opportunities. Europe less vulnerable than the Kremlin. The east flanks the necessity in safeguarding the West. The alt causes Ukraine, Turkey. Ukraine is definitely an alt cause. There's no Article 5 war that conceded that Hungary and France would veto it, which means it won't happen. Which means the advantage to commit to this position. Also, no Russia war. The trend evidence is super good. NATO is stable. Putin cares about domestic issues and conflict won't be militarized. Every reason that the Russian is in a revisionist means that they would have cooler heads in it and lead to dissuade conflict escalation. Moscow believes that NATO is strong enough, and Putin's focused on domestic concerns now, which means it wouldn't escalate. Advantage 2. Ukraine thumbs their wedge internal war instead. I rehighlighted the German card. There's no way they get out of this. It's a super intuitive. Every piece of offense suggests that Georgia and Ukraine, but don't evaluate the new evidence because the one is committed to the evidence instead it's the opposite, which is the basis for Negron. But only our 1AC evidence is indicative of the internals. It's always the 2AC evidence because the 1AC establishes the threshold of their internal link. Obviously, Ukraine thumbs all this stuff, which means they don't get into any terminal impact with the one that will have the rest of the terminal impact defense, but the rest of the arguments from the 1AC first advantage apply to this advantage as well.
Are you good? Volume okay for everybody? All right. So starting on topicality, does the negative have a card that defines alliance commitment and does not just use it in a sentence?
Yes.
Okay, which one's that?
The 1NC evidence defines it, and the 2NC card defines it.
The 2NC card, do you mean Yarly Milo?
Yeah. Let me see which one it was. Yeah, Yarly Milo.
Okay, well, the Silverson evidence in the 1NC says we view types of alliance commitments as an ordinal index of willingness, and then it sort of describes how the Correlates of War project codes alliances, right? Is there any component of this that defines alliance commitment?
Yes, it's defining types of alliance commitments, and then it goes on to say the strongest alliance commitment is a defense pact. 2, right. The definition of the one or in the 2NC is defining alliance commitments. 3, you never define alliance commitments.
You're defining a word, right? Because anybody can use alliance commitment in a sentence that does not make it a predictable basis for excluding affirmative.
This is defining it. It's saying we view these types of alliance commitments, and then it continues to go on to say the strongest alliance commitment is a defense pact. Then the 2NC evidence defines it in the whole section.
Okay, I view that computer. Does that mean that I am defining that computer as I speak?
You have not counter-defined alliance commitments, so this is going to be a really bad spot for you if you're going to go into this area. But we've also defined it in the 2NC to evidence. So even if you didn't mean it, go ahead.
Can an AF reduce troop presence and be topical under your interpret?
Our interpretation says defense pacts. If something under defense pact includes troop presence, if someone read a definition that said that, that would be topical in our interpretation.
Okay, well, there's a thing. I mean, surely troop presence is not a part of Article 5. It's not written out in the treaty, and you said it means treaty.
There are cards on this topic that would say defense pacts include, Article 5 commitments include our security commitments under them. That's the basis.
Okay, wait, our security commitments under them. That sounds like a written a promise to behave a certain
No,
way?
it doesn't sound like a promise because a promise is not an alliance commitment. Our waiver evidence indicates that NATO exists beyond that. The mutual pledge, it works in political commitments, works in economic commitments. Everything beyond the military exists as part of NATO.
So if the AF is held to this defense pact floor, right, has to limit the conditions under which the defense pact can be activated. And then beyond that, they are forced to reduce an alliance commitment that we already have, right? So defense pact floor plus some alliance commitment that is pre-written, right? Why does that explode limits?
Because you have to meet, so all of our arguments in the top of the overview were pretty solid on this. You have to meet this first part of the resolution to meet the, because your AF and your interpretation of AFs allows the AF to get a bunch of extra topical advantages, like non-military activities, military training, etc. And it destroys the core basis for net ground.
Last question. I'm taking prep for this. This is important. 734. Explain to me why those extra topical advantages would not be nuked by a pick out of Article 5.
So here a couple things. So first is that you have clearly proven that the pick out of Article 5 is not textually competitive or functionally competitive with your version of the app. Two, the military training, special forces operations, cyber hardening, command and control, thousands of other cooperative activities can be outside of what the resolutional basis is and have their own angles to advantages and will find their own purpose for what those things are.
All right.
703.
Okay, no prep, it's coming up.
Sorry, that 703 was us ending prep. I'm not saying you're prepping. I just wanted to make sure everybody knew that. Okay, cool.
All right, the order will be long, so I'll go through it right now. The order is going to be the advantage 2. This is what happens when the 2NC gives you everything. Advantage 2, the Article 5 pick, the appeasement DA, the Japan DA, then the advantage counter plan, then CON, then the intelligence committee DA. All right. Is anyone?
Yeah, sorry. I need like one more time, please.
Yeah. One more time. It is Article 5 pick. Appeasement.
Was advantage 2 on top of all that?
Oh, so yeah, advantage 2. Sorry. That's where I'm starting. God, I don't even know the order. Advantage 2, Article 5 pick, appeasement, Japan, the advantage counter plan, CON, and then the intelligence community DA. All right. Is anyone not ready? Flows here. Cool. The They say shift to China internal is terrible based on Ukraine and Georgia. That was high on top. Though no China impact rises peaceful and one escalate alliances, military power incentive and insurance to solve its meta evidence and no impact to fourth generation war. And five the 4GW is nothing more than the series of what is terrorist movies attacks is not designed to implement society, but the theoretical thoughts just selective targeting 4GW thought theories failed to come from many 21st century wars would be these characters old-fashioned weapons. The recent conflict we quite well, and warming doesn't trigger extinction. The IBD evidence is really good. It's a peer-reviewed journal shows IPC exaggeration history proves resilience and no extinction warming under Paris goals, and the rock ring strategies could offset warming, so we'll adapt to it in the future. Advantage our five pick. We'll concede the preparations just as competition. We're not going for an appeasement. DA will concede that there's no Russia impact. There's Russia's defense. There's no Russia impact. We're not going for it. There's no offense here. The Japan DA will concede that there's no credibility theory. There's no offense here because it doesn't spill over to Japan because none of their perception impacts will spill over the advantage counterpoint. We'll concede all the planks except the United States federal government should not renew efforts to integrate Georgia into NATO. That means it becomes a non-issue that doesn't link us to the DAs, but doesn't rule out accession into NATO. Cross-section 2EC dropped this and proves that a 1% risk of a differential means that you have to go neg because it solves all their evidence. That's the only U.S. pushing is the only way that Georgia gets into NATO, which means that it definitely solves on a broader level. All the theoretical reasons are just reasons to reject the argument, not the team, and con. Congress solves the African created by the states. The Counterparts Convention but does not say did not use the president or the executive branch of creating or implementing negotiations to be identical. The except for who's negotiating, which they have no card defending fiat immediately solves the other deficits. The Biden agreement. We won't change his push for Georgia, but block their entry to cause impacts to Article 5. There's no enter in R2AC that solves the entrapment scenario. The convention occurs immediately upon state passage. The COs and things once the states passes the convention will be called and permutation. Both links to DA triggers Biden until community fights that the counterpart loan solves the permutation. The counterpart severs the USFG. The counterpart and action to conduct a constitutional convention. Either the counterpart may include federal action. The resolution is the only federal government, so there's no way to interpret the plan as including state initiation and constitution counterpart competes as co-bill. And so no person could also regard the constitution president's direct the laws of force and the theory of interpretation. The creation of a constitutional convention that solves runaway 50 state fiat because we cannot fiat everything that in the affirmative can defend federal implementation. They fiat multiple agents to implement the app. You never fiat the entire USFG kills ground on both sides. Crossplay reasonability and arbitrariness for it's key to negative flex because DA suck and they ground outweighs reactionary ground. The solve the advocate theory that's arbitrary. After does not have a solve the advocate that says their text no warrant for why it's bad and reject arbitrary theory interpretations. So we make the affluent down and everything. And we have a solve the advocate and it competes on federal. Solve the case. It's Evelyn in 18 guts and Congress allows for the convention bypass Congress states good. Start writing members limits the specification of the DA. Intel community solves the launch of global threats, proliferate Iran, climate terror, China, and Russia, and all emerging threats this year that escalate the community odds of one outweigh every impact because they have to wait a particular set of events that solve their impacts. There's only defense on two of them, which means we'll go for the others. And the strong Intel community policy relations de-escalate every crisis. All allows covert actions that signal resolve, which while ending the risk where it's roving evidence politicization prevents warnings from Intel community translating into decision making, undermines response to all of the impacts of Dempsey in 19-day communities that rapidly evolving threats of the future military competition, China, Russia, the North Korea, empowering not state doctors, all kinds of Islamic State emerging tech, AI, quantum competing synthetic biology, the effective countering the new challenges that for political AI, the unhealthy, the rigid political foundation of the two effective national security system, making the rigors the security planning process that reduces the likelihood of making poorly controlling and execute decisions, less than risks, and the link loan insurance case that makes Georgia a zone of conflict between policy and community. I see that causes intel shift to hide influence from civilians. Definitely turns the case that fights cause them to share reactor info that ruins security cover proves it's immoral. And unfortunately, that I always get opposed to participate in the assessment of Congress that make it difficult for policy officials to indirectly fortune the infusion until the gaps with the intelligence offers to tell Congress regarding our the elections security is worse than even a private agency which only budgets considering as a country confers coronavirus. I guess the key element tells question have profound implications for Americans not relying to work with objectively secure to work catastrophically and extinction. Our evidence says and causes massive wars. Their evidence doesn't say small wars can cause extinction and even limited war cause extinction. That's the effect in the argument. 19 the arsenals are trying to stop the regional threats to grow up and down, lessening the effects of the up and life on the electromagnetic weapons and nuclear explosion of blockades sunlight the results in even small war that any could produce the ice age Arizona police and imperial regional conflict that result in global cooling up and nuclear winter not just when the detonation weapons even small and fall in the air. Mark the card air the link to the alliances are key. The intelligence community loves broad U.S. presence and would hate any backdown broad restrictions on A5 powers over and NATO throws the entire treaty in the fire in the minds of the community. The whole pressure low. The Unix evidence that they're watching Biden now and specifically Biden is the problem. That looks like Biden pulling back over broader leadership without consultation. This intelligence community insiders care about feeling heard early on. Anything else explodes their cohesion too. Is that top-down leadership is what they hated most about Trump, and after undermines Biden measures steps to reassure. I see they're on board with his current approach, especially allied research, but small changes are enough to straighten relations because bad faith ruins depth as landly and voter evidence conceded. Uniqueness means there's only risk of a link that Biden is in lost camp with the intelligence community on the rest of the planet. Fast break from the professionals league and one to one Biden's ordering intelligence agencies to provide them with the assessment of the Russia hacking. The Biden's tasked the agencies with the renewing interference in 2020 election. The moves to contrast to downplay the hacking operations and interference. Biden suggests Russia was responsible. Link tiers. All their link defenses about Congress, not key. The DA is about intelligence community inside the executive, like CIA and FBI. The link is functionally drop publicly. It doesn't matter for consultation. Which link which is drop in. Mitchell Card says the public doesn't care, not Congress. Smolnik says it's unequivocal, means it's pretty opposed to where Yale and Smolnik evidence and standoff evidence assumes new standoff during political changing times. All your evidence assumes he's pushing Georgia. The Biden's team are restoring relations. I see that, but it's close. It's Harrington and 21. The Biden is knowledgeable, appreciative, consumer intelligence. That been restoring the normalcy. The selected decision team, including leading members of both known I see that box offering that advice to their media party repairing the damage that Trump has done with our relations with it. I see the obvious problem Trump cannot approach to the foreign policy the hacks and NATO flatter ridiculous precipitate, which also started to engage alliances in Europe and Asia, the alienation of allies left with vital intelligence relations to in tatters, and none of their thumper stuff makes any sense because only about Biden. Our unique evidence is prices it in and says that he is working now, but big shifts will cause problems.
7:03 starting. We stopped with 1:39. So.
Nate's gonna send out a doc. I sent one like rehabbing in the body an email.
Where's this? Okay. The order is, advantage 1, advantage 2, topicality, then the advantage counterplan, and then con, and then the intel BA.
Sorry. 1, 2, T, advantage counterplan.
Yep. Advantage counterplan.
Intel DA.
Con, intel BA. Yes.
Oh, con, then intel. Yes.
Sorry.
No, you're good. Okay, cool.
I believe I did. Did I not? Yeah. Can you just download it from the email?
Yeah.
You're like in line, and it's saying you're in line.
Yeah. Go me out.
Yeah, just so it doesn't like pop up and not. Is everyone good? Awesome. U.S.-Russia war causes extinction. It's the only one that gets there because of size of arsenals. No alternative causes the Gallagher evidence says that nothing else gets there except for Ukraine and Georgia. 1, NATO enlargement is an article of faith within Russia's security communities. That's not indicative of Poland. 2, is that their geographical buffer, Napoleon, the Nazis, etc. means it's uniquely threatening to get rid of that. That does not exist for other existing NATO nations. Ukraine does not take it. The one EC piece of Pontiac's evidence says that Russia, or Putin rather, is not pushing for Ukraine in the status quo as he is for Russia. The 2 EC piece of evidence indicates that Russia does not perceive it to be as threatening and as likely as Georgia. So uniquely lash out, but it will not in other areas. Yes, Russian war evidence is far too old. There's far too old. Our evidence says the threat perception is high now due to Russia probing, and it's existential because it eliminates their geographical buffer, which is the training and Gallagher evidence mentioned about the EU advantage. No, the alternative causes not change. The dishad the Pontiac's evidence was on the other page, only pushing for Georgia. Now the interlink evidence says that this year it will cause fracturing because there's a renewed push, which means that even in 2017, if they cared about Ukraine, they only care about Georgia. In the scroll, Chinese tech rise is not peaceful. Their express purpose is to overthrow and leapfrog the West. Technological leapfrogs cause transition wars, despite the tech alone not being bad, which is why 4G is not defense. Global warming does cause extinction. History is a bad metric. It does its feedback loops, which the Korea evidence indicates causes rapid warming in the future. They have conceded a new start. Impact absent. Arms control breakdown. It's existential. It's key to check exotic weapons. That red lines cause miscalc, which the body evidence no new answers. T enlargement page at the top. We certainly meet this. Reduce it into written agreements to integrate Ukraine and Georgia. That's the NATO evidence. Those agreements have been extended. Those implicate Article 5 because it pledges us to defend should those accede. Second, plan text in the vacuum. It's the only non-arbitrary standard for adjudicating topicality. So it's solely a question of topicality. Importantly, they have only defined extended interest to the first half of the resolution. They have defined alliance commitments as defense pacts. We have defined defense pacts conditions, and they have dropped the defense pacts are inherently uncertain, which is the Berkeley evidence means. There's no predetermined set of treaty obligations the plan has to get rid of. Just the possibility of future activation. This is proven by causes not being guaranteed, even if a treaty condition is even if a condition is triggered in the SWO. So changing the conditions of the defense pact means that we reduce alliance commitments definitionally, which is the 2C Berkeley evidence. Otherwise, they make no aft topic because none of the conditions are required but are inherently speculative, which is why reducing the possibility of future action is necessary. Now they've dropped our interpret the second half of the resolution. We're not going to go for it as offense, but it's terminal defense to limit explosion because apps have to at least limit the condition. And the fact that they have combined the ceiling and the floor to just mean one thing means meaning the second half definitionally meets the first, even if in other debates it is not now. Counterinterpret of alliance commitments. Those are pre-existing written agreements to behave with certain ways with allies. That's a Denny evidence. We meet because U.S. pledged to integrate Georgia. That's the NATO evidence. Their interp of the word is uniquely bad. 1, overloading any app needs to reduce true presence to solve anything. Otherwise, it's an all cause that nukes every advantage. Their defense list in the 2NC said you get OCOs. That is just fundamentally incorrect. That's extra topical under their interpret because they said the only thing that you can change is a defense pact that does not include OCOs. So those advantages that are tube second is resolutional integrity. It makes the floor and the ceiling synonymous. That's redundant. Any other inter flies in the face of any reasonable read of the resolution. Explicitly the description from the topic committee, which is a 2EC screenshot, that should come before anything else. We should not be punished if the predictable read of the resolution is what the app had and they've just found one inter that says that they should be excluded. Their interpretation says, quote, these alliance commitments. It's not exclusive. It's just describing types of alliance commitments. It has no intent to define, no intent to exclude. It's just merely descriptive to 2NC 790. We view these types of alliance commitments. Now, every other app they have does not define the word commitment, which our 2EC 10 evidence does. It just defines alliance. What an alliance is sort of irrelevant in terms of defining the counter because only we have a word, only we have defined the word commitment and use it to exclude anything. And it is a definition that includes political support for your security, legal intent. We define alliance commitments in terms of support for the states provided for its allies. One indicator of commitment is the degree of political support for the security policy makers using indicators to operationalize an operation of the alliance. Now, we're not going to go for the buy at least argument. We'll concede this argument that you have to meet the top half of the resolution that solves limits as for the reasons above. Now, there's no limits offense. One, the floor checks. There's only a precondition commitment to integrate 3 countries. NATO and 23 countries declared aspirations to Bosnia, Georgia, and Ukraine. It checks out their case lists. There's no pre-existing guarantees that all things they have said. Second, functional limits, Article 5, peace halls. Every absence of them have a defense pact. You warrant third position turns. It determines pre-round private unpredictable stasis. Same with ground defense pact 4 means you get generics like deterrence and pro-lift, QPQs, counterplan, etc. Reasonability will concede it on condo. They will concede it on condo. Cross application is likely. The case list is 3 apps voting on a marginally more limited topic rates and incentive to go for resolutional threshold. That's just beyond what we do. It's not judge intervention. It's impact framing, which is never because of evidence evaluation. Now, the advantage counterplan permutation of the counterplan is the way the app could happen, and it's dropped in the 2EC and makes it kind of competitive, destroy all after down because it just specs the way that the app could happen, which justifies every process counterplan in the book. It links to net benefit alone. The thing about how the international, the intelligence community and allies would perceive the counterplan in the United States is pushed in largely for years. Biden suddenly supporting it. Their evidence, if they're right about their link, says that that is good, and the plan and the counterplan just reverses that. None of their evidence speaks to the differential between the plan and the counterplan. So any deficit should outweigh because the counterplan certainly links the disadvantage that alone does not solve the drop the cross application for the Article 5. Pick the plan must be codified irreversible. Over in 20, the least we can do is screen further NATO expansion to make it official administration. Unless privately, that card is marked as privately ambiguity causes any escalation because Biden has been active in the status quo and absent, actively withdrawing that support causes Russia to still perceive that we're pushing it. Con counterplan at the top. It does not solve the F1 is advantage 2. Biden still pushes enlargement. The fact that the counterplan competes because it can't solve anything that alone alienates Western European allies because it still has the United States forwarding, even if domestically it's impossible. Second is advantage 1. They have conceded the latest evidence. The Huckabee evidence that takes years to get up and running and to resolve fights. The interim, they've conceded that Georgia is holding uniquely now because of Azerbaijan's success, which is the Pontius evidence. So it massively outweighs the intel this had at the top. The case turns at this ad. We have at a much higher level. The alliance is frayed now. They've conceded a whole bunch of link terms for the case. The advantage 2 says there's no alliance cooperation. The 1 internal link evidence says it is a function of good relations with allies so that they can trust our intel. They've conceded a piece of beta evidence from the Japan that says that the perception of the United States credibility is terminally true because expansion means that existing allies do not perceive that we're existing allies will hedge because they don't perceive that we're credible to them. Trump disproves their impact. The impact is just intel sharing good in a vacuum. 4 years disproves this. The thesis of the unique argument is that Trump turned all this stuff. The link alone does not turn case. The plan increases intel sharing over Georgia by increasing NATO cohesion, which is the totality of advantage 2. If we're right about that thesis claim, then this disad makes no sense because we only boost NATO relations.
Okay, we have 3:15 left. So I'm gonna set that up. Right when I mute, I'll start it.
We're fixing the standard now.
Okay. The order is the con-con counterplan, then advantage 1, advantage counterplan, or sorry, advantage counterplan, and advantage 2, and advantage 1, then the DA.
Sorry, can you give that again?
Yep. It is the con-con counterplan, then the advantage counterplan, then advantage 2, advantage 1, and the DA. All right. Is anyone not ready? Perfect. All right, I'm gonna start in 5 seconds unless someone stops me. Con solves the amendments created by the states. UCP use a convention, but does not use the president or executive branch to create it to implement the negotiations be identical to the app except for who is negotiating, which they have no card defining. It is definitely perceived internationally, which solves all the Biden agreement arguments that we won't change his push for Georgia, but we'll block their entry to cause impacts to Article 5, which is a global signal that it won't be capable. Russia would definitely not perceive that as Biden push as a credible push because Georgia's accession would be terminally blocked. And France and Georgia, France and Hungary saying no would definitely also further the Russian perceptions that independently that would change the negotiation. That sends a global signal that's perceived. It terminally limits it. It is immediate. This tubes the app. It definitely solves advantage 2 because no evidence actually distinguishes the president being necessary to those things. Even if the plan is key, they will try to cross apply this something from the other counterplan to say that the plan is necessary, but that evidence says that eliminating permanence is necessary. The plan does not do that. The plan only limits Article 6 application to the region, which is what their application was from topicality, which means they don't do enough of it, or they don't solve enough of the app because it's not because they don't actually eliminate the permanence that was proven by the other advantage counterplan, which would have otherwise happened. The immediacy deficits don't make any sense. First of all, there's no quantifiable deficit that's applied on the counterplan or on the case page. Second is that they concede the COS evidence that says the convention occurs immediately upon state passage, which would mean that the fiat would solve immediacy solves the delay. There's no permutation, but it will link to the data because it triggers Biden Intel community fights that the CP alone solves, but the counterplan's a global signal it would be able to resolve. They didn't do enough arguments on enough answers to this. They overcover topicality and drop this, which means it should frame the way you do it. You evaluate the ballot. The advantage 2, there's no chance they get the advantage counterplan can see Purdue both sets of competition. We're not going for it. The Purdue counterplan obviously doesn't advocate for the evidence test of competition. Advantage 2. Ukraine definitely thumps their wedge internal. They disagree with it, which means no shift. The German evidence is better than their evidence, the evidence they are citing from advantage 1 because it's specific to the internal link in the perception of Russia and China from it. It's super intuitive. Every piece of evidence says Georgia and Ukraine, but don't evaluate their new evidence because they want to see committed to evidence that says the opposite, which is the basis for net ground. But they want to see evidence is indicative of the internals outweighs the 2C evidence, or they want to see evidence from the other advantage because they want to see established that the threshold. The internal link, the evidence is way better. It says that Georgia and Ukraine also hold a frame for all their evidence. And all of it indicates Georgia and Ukraine. They have no evidence that says that Ukraine isn't fracturing now. The only evidence says that Georgia might also be fracturing, but Ukraine definitely still is fracturing the alliance because they definitely disagree on both issues. It's an application of Article 10, which broadly is perceived by NATO and undermines both internal links and disadvantage, which means they don't get to any of the impacts. There's also no chance they win it. There's global frame. All their evidence indicates Georgia and Ukraine impact proper. First is the fourth generation warfare impact doesn't have an impact. The one in our card is super good. It says that it won't spill over to other conflict scenarios. I think people and other countries will want to default to the lower measures. Also, the Medin card is super good. It says there's no China impact. Rise is peaceful. There's alliances, military power, and they'd have no incentive to escalate because sure as to resolve them. They also would want to default to things like the miscalculation measures and dialogue through to prevent mutually assured destruction. The warming impact definitely doesn't trigger extinction. IBD defense is super good. It says peer review journal that shows the IP IPCC exaggeration that it says that history proves resilience. It also says no extinction. It cites specifically that warming is under Paris goals and is specific to all their impacts. The New START impact, there's no deal. There's no deal to New START. They conceded the internal link defense that's super good on Georgia and Ukraine. Also, there's no chance that they get to New START when there's other things that thumb encirclement like Poland presence. There's also the counterplan solves it because it sends the signal to Russia, which is a permanent signal from the CONCON counterplan advantage. One, Ukraine is an all cause to Russian threat perceptions. The Mueller evidence is better than any evidence in the debate, and it's from there when I see it's the newest evidence, which also indicates that Russia is perceiving Ukraine now as a spoiler. U.S. presence in Poland also cuts off Russia's global reach and angers the Kremlin because they're right on the edge. That's the Zarina evidence. There's no Article 5 war. They conceded that Georgia isn't a seat of the whole second advantage premise on it, and they conceded France and Hungary veto also. They need it. There's no Russia war. Prefer evidence. Trenton is better, even if it's older. It calculates the risk of any impact less than 1%. There's no basis for thinking the expansion is an existential threat. It doesn't come with forces, nukes, PMD, or any other indicator for imminent invasion, which means they can't evaluate extinction against it. The DA, Intel community solves launch lists of global threats, prolif, Iran, counterterrorist, China, and Russia are all emerging threats. They issue that escalate the cumulative odds of one outweigh every app impact because they'd have to win one particular set of events to solve their impacts. That obviously triggers extinction because it involves Russia and other factors. Always on scope. And strong intel community policy relations de-escalate every crisis that allows covert actions that signal resolve while ending the risk of war. That's the relevant evidence. The link debate is massive and conceded. The intel community expanding broader consultation with Biden is expecting broader consultation with Biden, and his reassurance model is a critical internal link to deeper relations, which means the Japan stuff doesn't matter. They also hate Russia and want broader alliance policies in favor of strength and alliance commitments. Don't let them back out of the link. They only read D about Congress. The app looks like Biden putting back a broader relationship without consultation in intelligence community. Insiders care about the feeling had early on. Anything else explodes their cohesion. No matter the spin, no matter the cards, the app has to renege on the alliance commitments. We're the only ones that have certain evidence about how the intelligence community would respond to the plan. And Harrington is on point. It also turns the case. They had information engaged in hidden operations in Georgia in opposition to Biden, magnifies the chance of risk perception, Russia perception problems because of CIA and FBI gaps that happened as shielded from the president. Why don't see Lincoln impact evidence say that breakdown causes lash out? That means the intelligence divide isn't implicated by things like Japan or Trump, which doesn't make any sense. The Trump argument is also new in the one era, doesn't disprove the impact. They spent 4 years waiting for new president. Our uniqueness, 2 and C and 1 and C arguments are great and presume Trump. Japan stuff is about alliance credibility globally, but doesn't impact the perception of Biden or the perception from the intelligence community, which is entirely distinct from any of their evidence, and none of their evidence evaluates it. Evaluate the app evidence or the neg evidence way better. There's no chance they get to a terminal impact. They overcover T. That was their mistake. They lose.
$139. We'll start that.
All right. Order is advantage 1, advantage 2, on time, disadvantage.
Sorry. Give it again. I apologize. I just wasn't listening. Straight up wasn't listening.
Callahan's checking his stonks.
Yeah.
Owns too many cryptos.
My NFT holdings are off the chart.
Checking on GME.
Advantage 1. Are we good for an order? Sorry. Advantage 2. The con counter plan that is add. Okay. Is everybody ready? The plan solves the short-term nuclear war. The U.S.'s commitment to integrate Georgia into NATO backs Russia into a corner which escalates the likelihood of conflict. Our evidence says that Georgia is uniquely likely. They have dropped moral hazard theory that backing Georgia causes them to attack Russia, which answers their defense, but just answers their defense because it proves that Ukraine is not an all cause. It proves that Russia will not invade, which proves that Ukraine is not an all cause. But it does mean that Georgia will initiate a conflict because they know that the U.S. is backing them, and they will not face the hazards of conflict, which is what we see men in evidence. Our evidence says that Georgian leaders are risk tolerant and willing to take risks, which is not true for Ukraine. And our evidence is explicitly comparative. Ukraine cannot be an all cause. This Mueller evidence is an all cause to arms control, not all cause to arms control, not advantage 1. We're kicking that stuff. They have no card that Biden is pushing it, or that Europe, or that Russia cares. When we see evidence, where we see evidence indicates Georgian membership is uniquely anathema to Russia because Georgia is still at war with Russian statelets, whereas Ukraine has shown flexibility and willingness to compromise. Georgia started the 2008 war by striking Russian targets, whereas Ukraine has never actually been at war with Russia and did not initiate the Crimean conflict. As a result, Russia perceives Ukraine is pragmatic and dovish, and Georgia is hawkish and risk tolerant, making sponsoring the latter's membership unpopular and anathema in a way that sponsoring the former isn't. That's the when you see M2EC evidence. The bare minimum threshold for a thumper card is that pushing Ukraine's membership causes Russia to go to war, which they've never presented. They've highlighted one line of a piece of evidence that says it provokes. They don't have a warrant for this encirclement argument. And lastly, and this is most important, they have dropped our spillover arguments that the plan offers an olive branch to Russia. It proves that the West is not bent on their destruction, which empowers moderates within the Russian state, which solves all of this. Frame the debate through a conceded magnitude differential. Only U.S.-Russia war causes extinction. Other nuclear wars are too small. They do not kick up enough soot or produce enough smoke to engulf the atmosphere in fire. This means that we can survive and recover from a smaller nuclear war, but only a U.S.-Russia war ends this species. This means a small risk of the case outweighs even a full risk of the disadvantage, because you have a categorical preference for offense. The impact differential between ours and theirs is literally quadrillions of lives, because it has a hypothetically infinite carrying capacity and could support future generations indefinitely, which means that it's far safer to their affirmative time frame is also faster, because it would take decades for the entire intelligence community to collapse. But the Biden is intervening now, which ensures short-term escalation. This also answers no Russia war. None of their evidence assumes enlargement, which backs them into a corner, sure, it's provocations. And regardless, Georgia will start a war. They've dropped that draws in the U.S. because we have 1,000 troops. Advantage 2, we're not going for a concede. Either there's no impact to tech, concede no impact to China, or the warming stuff. We still get link turns to the other page because all of our evidence says pushing expansion fractures the alliances. It is domestically unpopular. The con counter plan. Sufficiency framing is not said in the 1 and in the 2 and R. And again, we have explanations of why you must overcorrect affirmative on any risk of a deficit. The counterplan solves nothing. Their lack of evidence should frame everything. We have evidence that says Biden is pushing for Georgian expansion now. There is renewed energy, and he speaks for all of U.S. foreign policy. Pontius says that alone causes Russia to overcorrect by preemptively placing their forces on high alert status, which ensures offense. All of our evidence says the actual process of expansion is sort of irrelevant because it all says that it is unlikely. So the counterplan making expansion is illegal, is irrelevant, because it is all about perception, about the perception of expansion. There is no chance that the counterplan causes Biden to stop pushing for it. There's no warrant or card as to why that's right. Biden speaks independently and will continue to push, even if you think they might make that awkward. Any risk that he pushes it weighs the disadvantage. There's also a time frame deficit. Huckabee says the process takes roughly a year or 8 months. They cannot fiat it. That we say we should not do the plan using constitutional convention, not that the constitutional convention starts and ends in one fell swoop. You should default to probabilistic evidence in the face of that, because otherwise it lets the negative fiat totally unworldly things. They have one just reference to 1 AR card that, oh my God, is so bad. It does not say anything. I have no idea how it responds to this argument because it's warrantless. The impact is fast. Menon says Georgia is going to integrate a moral hazard into this quo. No evidence says the counterplan solves that. And Trennan is from last month and says recent success in the Nagorno-Karabakh Azerbaijan dispute, and that Georgia is uniquely likely to escalate in the near future. So that answers that next argument. Now, the disadvantage
At the top, it cannot turn the case. They don't have a warrant for why it turns our stuff, and the plan solves the reasons it turns the case. It solves lash out because Russia is a defensive power, and the plan causes them to not be revisionist anymore by empowering internal moderates. As per when you see Schifferson, this DA is the epitome of mental gymnastics. For you to vote negative, you have to believe that the entire intelligence community is inoperable and no data is shared ever because their impact and internal link evidence just says the intelligence community is good in a vacuum, or we should share data. No evidence says that as a result of politicization, means that no data is shared. So the best version of the DA is like 20%. Trump disproves everything. They have no evidence that Intel operates differently under Biden. The thesis of the first card in the 1NC is that Trump ruined the connection of the Intel community. The 1NC impact just says intelligence good. They do not access that in a vacuum. And all 2NC evidence was written during Trump. The lack of terrorist attacks and war should make you confident that Intel is wholly irrelevant. They sort of misunderstood this argument. It was certainly not new. We said it in the 2NC. And regardless, you forfeited the right to grandstand about new arguments when you shredded a tree from the 1NC off case. And regardless, the one under a shit ton of positions, so the 1AR gets a ton of lenience. They have neglected a link turn to the AF. Advantage 2 is a link turn. This is especially true because their 1NC evidence is about, quote, strengthening NATO. The link turn has been neglected for 2 speeches. 2ECBB says that the plan signals resolve to defend existing member states because it draws a line in the sand against further Russian aggression and enables the alliance to consolidate resources internally. This also answers the soft on Russia argument because if the entirety of NATO is crying out for the AF, then why is the plan soft on Russia? The plan consolidates NATO and makes it stronger, and they have dropped that argument. When you see German says that pushing expansion fractures cohesion, it, quote, drives a wedge between the US and allies and emphasizes ambiguity. The intelligence community, if they care at all or attached at all to alliance politics, know that that is the case and thus would support the AF. When you see Ashford says that it drains alliance focus, it obscures signals about US resolve, clouds perceptions, which undermines focus on remedying NATO's internal disagreements. We have 3 link turns, and they have read no evidence that is close to the AF. The 2NC or 1NC cards are all tagged link fiat or something like that, whereas we have specific evidence that is contextualized to what they have articulated as the link. Good debate.
Good debate. We'll get you on.
Are judges okay if I stream the RFDs?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Can you all send docs? Thank you.
Cal, if there's like re-highlightings and stuff, make sure to include those.
Okay.
I get Kansas too, both teams.
AFDOC is sent.
Neg card doc is also sent.
Yep.
I think if people are there, we're ready to discuss decisions. Are both Berkeley debaters there? I see one of you, I see two of you. Perfect. Okay. We got everybody we need. Congratulations to both teams for making it to the Octas of the NDT. It is an incredible feat, and you should be very proud of yourselves, especially for doing it in these crazy conditions. It is an incredible year, and you should both be proud of how you're doing it. This was a great debate. The decision was a 5-0 for the affirmative from Kansas. I can give mine quickly and succinctly. I think that there is an almost negligible risk of the disad and a delay deficit to the counterplan, and that there is a risk of the AF because Georgia is uniquely provocative to Russia. And even if there's some tension surrounding how Ukraine might create an encirclement threat, I don't know what the impact to that is and why it's urgent, given the delineation the 2AC makes and their cards like not great on, but okay, that Putin perceives Georgia as sort of unique, even if there is pressure that could potentially emerge elsewhere. I think that there needs to be a discussion of what fiat means and what the counterplan text does or does not do for you to win the argument that fiat solves delay. I understand the counterplan is introducing the convention and them as making the argument that upon introduction, the amendment process and ratification and sort of the collective effort needed to formalize it takes months. If you don't think that's true, I need to understand what the words in the counterplan mean and at what point it fiats through that. Absent that explanation, I think the card, like this is the length it likely takes, is how I should interpret the implementation of the counterplan. And given the urgency of Georgia being aggressive and the likelihood that that conflict breaks out immediately, I think there's a disad to the counterplan about Georgia causing a Russia war. The last thing I'll talk about is the disad. I really struggled with like reading this dissent and coming to conclusion about argument in general. And I think that like there's a shallowness on everybody's part that's kind of tough here. But I end up thinking that there's probably like some risk that the AF could affect intelligence, but I also don't really know because I think the link turn argument that's like they improve the credibility of our alliances to some degree makes me think that I'm unsure about what the effect of the AF is on the intelligence community. I know it probably makes some people in NATO happy and it might make some people unhappy, but there's no way for me to describe the effect of that on intelligence sharing in general and what type of information would compromise our ability to deal with any sort of threat. And without that information being apparent, I just don't know what impact I would vote on. So I think there's a risk of the case and the solvency deficit outweighs the DA. That's my spiel.
I think Kristen said it really well, but I will nonetheless give my own spiel. I thought a risk of the solvency deficit outweighed a pretty low risk of the DA. I think I agree with the AF that the fiat argument and the evidence you read means the convention can begin immediately, not that it is resolved or concludes right away. I think it would probably take some time, and I think the impact of that is quite large. Since we're hearing all about how U.S.-Russia war is a catastrophic deal for the entire debate and that it happens faster. The DA itself, I think, is not quite as low as maybe the AF would like it to be, but it is still not particularly high. I think the AF is right that the 1 and C impact assumes the existence of intelligence at like writ large as a thing. And it's really hard to believe that that gets zapped to 0 as a result of the DA. The later impacts that you read, I think, are more tied to the existence of actual links, but I think there's a couple things that the AF is doing to reduce that. I think there's some chance of this alliance link turn, as Kristen talked about. I think you're right that the AF doesn't necessarily solve it, because I think your alt cause stuff gets you a lot further on this than it does on the advantage, which I'll talk about in a second. But at the very least, it kind of introduces an inevitability of some kind of big alliance meltdown over expansion that would seem to throw a wrench into Biden's, perfect alliance strategy with the intelligence community. And I don't, it's frustrating because I don't think the AF evidence is particularly good on this, but they are like storytelling about it a lot, and I don't think that you're debating it very much. You're kind of just like, it's not about our thing next, and that's not quite enough. I think especially when There's also the problem that the app is getting mileage out of 4 years of Trump should disprove this. Your evidence definitely does a decent line walking job on current Biden reset is good and important, but it's still really hard to get past the idea that fractures that occurred under Trump would not be as great or greater than Biden changing his stance on NATO expansion at this particular moment. They also have evidence that not a ton of people care about it. Maybe those aren't people in the intelligence community. I don't know. I think they win a reasonable risk of the advantage that they're going for. I think Kristen said that pretty well. The app is aggressively distinguishing Georgia from Ukraine in terms of Russian perception. And I think the way that you're applying this in the 2NR is mostly on the other advantage. And again, it kind of gets back to like the app is doing a lot of storytelling that I don't think gets a lot of counter storytelling. And so that is, yes, that's where I landed.
I'm happy to jump in. I can be pretty quick because my actual decision was not meaningfully different than those of the esteemed judges that have gone before me. The thing I can add that hasn't been said is that I just like to be constructive about this. I think this is a block coverage issue. I think there's like a question as the issue of the choice of what to have in which speech in the block. If you want, it's like T, case, 1NR, case, counterplan, DA in the 1NR. I think the DA really suffers from being put at the bottom of both the 1NR and the 2NR. I think 2NR bottom, DA weird, I think not correct choice. Because if you have a counterplan, you don't have to go to the case before to the DA because like ideally your counterplan solves the case. I think the block should have chose either DA or counterplan for the 1NR. You don't really have enough benefit to the counterplan other than the DA. So, T, case, and the 2NC, DA and the 1NR is like the place you want to be, especially because stuff like this counterplan, like this starts as a text in the 1NC with nothing else, which already sort of offends my delicate sensibilities. I would be more receptive to it if the 2NC was like, okay, like, sorry, we had to read a bunch of shit, but like now here's our counterplan explanation, et cetera. Like at least it's better than what happened, which is like very sort of perfunctory extension. And then like that, the way it was extended was not enough to make it a viable 2NR option. So I thought that block choice issue kind of set up everything else that the other judges have talked about. But my actual decision was not meaningfully different. Yeah, the length of the card, I considered starting my decision by reading out the cards on the ConCon counterplan. I decided that would maybe be a little too spicy, but yeah, I think you get what we're saying.
Yeah, I can go unless Ron, if you want to. I don't want to beat the dead horse, but the Evless ConCon counterplan is really tough bar for me. It's just not a complete argument. You don't have evidence that suggests any international reaction to the counterplan. You don't have any evidence that suggests that it's a relevant or salient way that the plan could be implemented. You have, and at the most charitable interpretation of your card is that the Constitutional Convention is a thing that exists, which yes, but it does not link it to the affirmative in any meaningful way. And so just in my kind of like heart of hearts feeling about this, it just makes it easy for the AF to spin these deficits. It's like the counterplan would be a mega wacky way to alter foreign policy. It would be totally out of left field. It like any kind of like suggested kind of Biden pushes deficit is something. I think that it's correct that you don't get the fiat that the convention concludes immediately. There's like delays and fights about it, et cetera. And those are things that you could overcome, I think, if the argument started more complete and then got developed. But as it is, just with the text and nothing else, and then a little bit in the block, it's just you're behind the 8 ball in terms of explanation. So I just thought that the counterplan did not solve a Georgia emboldenment escalation with Russia fast enough, and that was just a little bit bigger than the DA. I don't really disagree with anything that the other judges said about the DA. I just think that like the 2NR was like two great tastes that don't taste great together. Like the Ukraine alt cause stuff is great if you're going for the DA, but it's like with ConCon, it doesn't really help. It's like kind of like you could have just cut that case stuff and like talked about the counterplan more, or the DA more, or you could have kicked the counterplan and just talked about the case a bunch and the DA. Either of those, I think, would have been just a much more kind of direct and clear route to victory. But you just kind of like got a little bit excited about a bunch of different things that you thought you were doing okay on individually that just kind of like didn't quite come together. And I think that it was a good tactical debate. I think you all debated very well, and you should be, obviously proud of a great tournament and a great season, but just the kind of just the forest for the trees issue in the 2NR, I think, was just where it kind of fell short for me.
Yeah, I think substantively, I don't have a ton to add. You know, I'm old. I guess my views on these types of counter plans, I have a little bit of alternatives. You know, I actually think you kind of stop short a little bit. Like, you know, if you're going to write this counter plan, you might as well write in that the convention is done in X amount of time. I mean, if you're going to abuse the shit out of fiat, go for it. You know, it's like, don't stop short because you know delay is going to be the solvency argument you hear. So you got to have some way of dealing with it. The biggest problem for me, because I agree, especially with what Kristen said, I give you a tiny risk of this disad. I mean, I can see some people in the intelligence community being like, I guess we probably should extend this to Georgia. Maybe that's important. But how they implicate the impact becomes really problematic. I mean, I'm not sure if this is a wide-ranging theory, given the context that other allies are pretty happy with it because it consolidates, you know, our alliance with traditional NATO members. It really puts you in a tough spot sort of at the end of the day. And, you know, maybe had the dissent actually turned the case. I know you made an effort at that, but I just couldn't flesh that out for you. I don't understand how, you know, having better intelligence stops a war with Russia if they're freaked out that we're going to potentially add in a nation that they're at war with right now. I mean, that's a high burden for you. And so, you know, that puts you in a tough spot. Just generally speaking, though, and I think all the judges have pointed to it, having one area of offense that's only a small subsection of the 1NR really doesn't give you a lot of options for the 2NR. And I don't know if it was like the head fake was too much on T and implicated your block selection or what happened, but it almost kind of went the other way. Like the way you ended the debate was like they overcovered on T, and I'm like, well, the 1AR didn't. And that's kind of what you needed to make this block strategy a success. So, you know, there's just got to be, I think, more offense to give you some other options outside of it. Because I even concluded you beat the case down pretty good. And, you know, and I'm giving you some of the counter plan. I just don't know when it'll be done. But at the end of the day, it just wasn't enough to get you there. And they got some pretty good case cards. So, you know, really good debate, though. I think it's been pointed out. It takes a while to sort of flesh these things out. But, you know, you executed well with what you went for. I just think earlier, a couple alterations could potentially, you know, give you a better outcome at the end of the debate. But congratulations.
Yeah, thank you all so much. I have some questions, but I want to let Kansas ask any questions or, you know, leave if they need to.